Get started, everyone. I'm going to call the special meeting to order. The time is 5:30 p.m. in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Government Code Chapter 551. This meeting is officially open with a quorum present. The following board members are present virtually. The ones that I see on the screen, I'm just going to go to you all. Coming over to District 4 Trustee Daphne Brookins.
Good evening, all. This is Daphne Brookins representing District 4.
All right, good evening, Trustee Brookins. Good to see you. Next, I see District 6 Trustee Andar.
Good evening, President Ramos. This is Andar, District 6 representing.
All right, good to see you as well. District 7 Trustee Norman Robbins.
Good evening, President Ramos. This is Norman Robbins representing District 7.
Good to see you, sir. District 8 Trustee Anaya Luevanos.
Good evening, President Ramos. Anaya Luevanos, representing District 8.
All right, good deal. And I am District 1 Trustee Jacinto Ramos Jr., representing District 1. We have a quorum. We'll welcome our colleagues as they jump on. On March 16th, 2020, Governor Abbott temporarily suspended certain open meetings requirements imposed by the Open Meetings Act to slow the spread of COVID-19. This action permits meetings subject to the Open Meetings Act to be hosted by telephone or video conference. This meeting is being broadcasted live via Spectrum Channel 192, the Fort Worth ISD live channel on YouTube, and link provided in the agenda. In accordance with those suspended rules, we certify the following: notice of this meeting has been posted for at least 72 hours. Although members of the board are not gathered in central physical location, we do have a quorum present in attendance at this meeting by video conference or telephone call. We are meeting by use of Zoom software application, which allows two-way communication from members of the public. As we would at any in-person meeting, members of the public who have followed the instructions on the meeting notice for registering to speak during the public comment portion will be unmuted for 3 minutes to speak. All other meeting procedures will adhere to board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. An audio recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public at a later date. We apologize in advance for any unforeseeable difficulties and ask for your patience as we navigate unprecedented conditions. If you have questions about these suspended laws, please call the Office of Attorney General at 888-672-6787 or by email at toma@oag.texas.gov. Next part of our agenda is supposed to be public comment. Want to take a moment to acknowledge Trustee Phillips has been able to join us, and Trustee Paz. Welcome to the meeting. I believe we do not have any public comment. Is that true, Mr. Bond?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Good, thank you. Well, Mr. Bond, will you take over on, and I also want to acknowledge Trustee Toby Jackson has joined us as well. So we will move on, Mr. Bond, to recognitions. Will you take it from here for now?
I believe Dr. Scribner has that, sir.
Yes, thank you, Clint, and thank you, President Ramos, members of the board. I want to use this moment to again say thank you to all of our employees who served us so well during last month's winter storm. That massive weather event was something we won't soon forget. Many of us lost power, water, internet service, and even now are still facing challenges getting all of these damages repaired. Yet once again, our Fort Worth ISD employees persevered during a tough time to support our students and the entire district, and we want to thank them. Thank you to our maintenance teams, to our custodial staff who inspected schools and went to work to clean them up. Thank you to our child nutrition services staff for providing meals for students, even though they were not yet back receiving instruction. And thank you to our safety officers who showed up to record any security concern. Thank you to our Division of Technology for visiting 90 schools over the weekend, checking equipment and connectivity. Thank you to our school administrators on our campuses and here at the district building for meeting at all hours to find solutions to numerous issues that emerged. We were not only making Plan A for the next day of school, but also Plan B and Plan C. And then quickly getting the word out to our employees, then our parents and all the Fort Worth ISD school community. Thank you to our teachers for preparing to instruct virtually until power outages made remote teaching and learning impossible. We appreciate everyone's hard work and patience. And now, even as many are still dealing with the aftermath, getting our schools and homes back to normal, we want to thank all of our school community, because we truly could have not done it without each and every one of our employees who helped. So I want to thank them, and thank you, President Ramos, for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Dr. Scribner. Just want to make sure that leads us to number 4, right? Reports and presentations. Okay.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
So, Dr. Scribner, would you mind introducing Aaron Munoz, our Chief Internal Auditor?
Yes, thank you very much, President Ramos and Fort Worth ISD school community. We have made it a practice to bring these periodic reports to you. And Aaron Munoz, our internal auditor, will provide an update on the internal audit. Mr. Munoz.
Thank you very much, Dr. Scribner. And yes, thank you all for letting me be part of today's meetings. Very much appreciated that we can continue with that initiative that we discussed at the last meeting where I was present at the board workshop of going forward and bringing the audit committee information to all the board members after we hold one of our regularly scheduled audit committee meetings. And so as you'll see here from the first slide, we held a meeting last February 23rd. And so what we're doing now is we're bringing that information to you. And so what happened at that meeting was we discussed the same information that we're going to talk about with you all today. During that meeting, those trustees that represent you all in the audit committee were able to ask questions of those individuals that were present and responsible for the areas of operation that we were discussing. They were able to provide comments and get feedback from everybody during that meeting as well. And so once that meeting was over, these reports were approved to go ahead and bring to you all. And so we're going to be discussing these different areas. And so what should have happened is last week, my administrative assistant provided all of you through email all of the reports, supplemental information that we're going to be discussing here today to hopefully prepare you for any questions or comments or any kind of items that you want to discuss during this meeting. I'm going to be leaving this kind of in a living status. So if there's anything that you need to see change, any information that you're not getting, please let me know so I can make those changes. I want to make sure that all of you all are getting the things that you need to get to make those decisions for the district that you need to make. And so please feel free. You can email me, call me, contact me, however you want, so I can make those changes to the information that you see necessary. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the discussion. And you'll see here on this slide, what we discussed at the last audit committee meeting was these 4 audits here. We looked at overtime expenditures for the district. We reviewed a campus audit of Leonard Middle School, and you'll probably be more familiar if I say that was a campus activity fund audit with that one. We looked at the district's hiring process, and also we looked at the procurement card controls, and we looked at the expenditures with procurement cards, and we reported on those as well. And so just to dive right in on the next slide, we can start discussing the overtime expenditures. And so what was provided to you with this report is we gave you the report, and then we also provided 2 supplemental documents. And those 2 supplemental documents laid out the overtime expenditures for the district for 2019 and 2018. And we categorized it by job code. And the reason that we did that was to show you what we did with this audit was we narrowed the focus down. So what we did was we tried to identify exactly which departments had the most overtime expenditures during those years. Because what we found when we started this review was that there was a number of departments, and what that would have entailed was getting different responses, different timelines for implementation of corrective actions. So we went with a different approach to where we identified that the district's operations for those 2 years, 19 and 18, actually had 80+% of all overtime expenditures in the district. And that's understandable because that's transportation, that's maintenance, that's operations. And so what we did was we focused our audit in that area. So what you'll see is those issues, those recommendations, those responses are mostly dealing with the operations area. There's a few things for finance, but most of the information here and the items of note are from the operations office. And so that's why we provided you those 2 supplemental documents, just to show you why we narrowed that focus down. And so with that, what we had is we had 2 issues with the operations management of overtime. And it had to do, the first one had to do with the pre-approval of overtime. And so here at the district, overtime is required to be pre-approved before it's conducted. And also it has to be documented as to the purpose of that overtime. So what we did was we reviewed 130 different overtime transactions. And out of those 130, we found around 95 to 90% of them were missing either some documentation or weren't there at all as was required by the district. And so it was hard for us to determine the validity, the oversight with the pre-approvals. And then so what we did then is we went to the post-approval to try to identify those items. And we surveyed those managers that are responsible for approving the overtime after it's occurred in the operations office, just asking, what is your review process? What is your documentation like for this process? How is it applied? How are you managing that overtime in your area? And the responses, they varied very widely. Some things, everything from I don't have any process right now to I do a weekly review. Some of them were I rely on on payroll to provide me a report monthly, weekly, so that I can manage the overtime. So that it wasn't a consistent process that was developed to show that the management of the overtime, even the post-approval, was there as well. And so when we took these 2 issues together and we tried to identify exactly what was going on and what would be the best recommendation for the district to address, this identification, looking at validity, looking at these pre-approvals, looking at the post-approvals, what would be the best recommendation to help address this? And overall, what we recommended to the operations department is the development, the documentation, the implementation, the communication of a comprehensive plan that's going to put those consistent items in place so you can readily identify, it's consistent. So I can tell exactly what I'm looking at. I can address these issues as I'm seeing them. I can see what overtime is valid. I can see which overtime is necessary. I can see, if possible, where we can reduce overtime and justify the expenditures that we're having currently. And also, in addition to this, in those small areas that we identified that were out of compliance, we put those in the same recommendation. So this was the overall one, but also you would see in this plan, please ensure that the overtime documentation is completed or present, ensure that there's a consistent process for the overtime. And so we brought this to the operations management. They agreed with the recommendation. In their report, they identified several items that they were using to address that. And they also stated that most of these items are already in place. And so what's going to happen going forward with this is that internal audit between that meeting and the next meeting that we're going to hold with the audit committee in May, we're going to go back to the operations office. We're going to sit down with them and we're going to walk through these new processes and identify exactly how they are addressing the risks that we've identified with the overtime expenditures. And so when we come back to that audit committee in May, we can report on that follow-up activity so they can know exactly if it's addressing it, if it's not addressing it. They can discuss it with management if necessary. So just so you know, that statement's being made so you can know how the process is going forward. On the next slide, also at overtime expenditures, there was another item that was identified with the payroll procedures manual. This is for finance. It was just a little bit inconsistent with current operations. So our recommendation was basically just to revise, review, set up a predetermined time frame in which you're going to review it, just to bring it into compliance so that the individuals that are managing overtime or these payroll processes can have a more comprehensive information on exactly what process they were supposed to follow. And that's a very brief explanation of the overtime expenditures report. Is there any questions on this report?
Trustees, if you would try to use that raise your hand feature, would be helpful. And if you don't have access to it, then so I see Trustee Brookins.
Yes, is there a cap on the overtime on how much the employees can accumulate over a certain amount of period?
From our review, I would say there is not currently a cap on the amount of overtime that is being that the employees can accumulate.
So how is that possible for them to approve it if there's not a cap on it, to approve it ahead of time?
Oh, approvals are done weekly. I'm sorry, the pre-approval. So, what we identified was most of the pre-approvals weren't in place, and this is a weekly process. It's supposed to be a weekly process where you have the pre-approvals and then the post-approvals after that as well. So, we've identified a number of employees that had quite a high amount of overtime.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the ones that did have the high amount, so was their overtime approved after the fact?
Some yes, some no. We looked at a number of transactions with the different individuals. So what we did was we selected 130 different transactions. So we would pick one person and then 1 month of their, I guess, highest overtime that they achieved to review for compliance. And so what we found was that sometimes that approval was missing, and then the post-approval most of the time wasn't documented as well. That's where that recommendation comes from, creating a comprehensive plan to address it as an entirety and making sure that things are documented so that we can see that, you know, it's necessary, it's valid, and we can address it if it's not.
So did those employees that didn't get their overtime approved, did they file a complaint, or were they upset that they did not get paid for that overtime?
We paid for that overtime, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any other raised hands. If any trustees have any questions, jump in. If not, then we'll get ready to move on.
I think that Trustee Jackson is trying to become a panelist so that she can ask a question. She may be on her daughter's computer because her name is, here we go. I think she might be in now.
I am here, but I don't have a question. I'm just happy to be here. Thank you, Trustee Dar.
Okay. Looks
Okay.
like
With that, we can move on to the next slide if y'all are ready.
okay.
Okay. The next slide was our activity funds audit over campus middle school. And what this audit is it represents the change in direction internal audit's taking with these projects. And so just a little background information. When I first started this position and discussed with the audit committee exactly those things that they were looking to change or questions they were looking to have answered, it seems that prior to me coming on, a number of activity fund audits had been produced by the office. And the question came of why do we keep seeing the repetitiveness of issues coming up? It doesn't seem that things are changing. And so we took a big holistic view of the process. What's internal audit doing? What's finance doing? What are the campuses doing? And we came up with a number of issues and recommendations for changes. And one of those was actually for our own office. And so what this was previously to me coming on, the way these audits were initiated was that every time there was a change in principle, that would prompt an audit to occur. And so what we've changed is we produced a more risk-based approach to this. And so what we're using is more analytical processes to see when things are maybe inconsistent in financial transactions. We have a negative account balances in our activity funds. Deposits are missing. We also talk to the finance office to see what their concerns are. And so that's how Leonard Middle School got onto the radar, and we performed our audit over this area. And on the next slide, I'd like to show you exactly, this is the change that we're having. Before there was just the report, and now what we're doing, we've compressed the report. The report is about 2 pages, and what we really provide to the principal is this information here. And what you can see, this is just an example of the overall spreadsheet. You have exactly what we reviewed on the left, and then next to that, exactly how it applies to the activity fund manual, how many items we reviewed and how many were non-compliant. And the reason we show those two things is that sometimes it's 1 for 1, like it is there highlighted in yellow. Sometimes it's 52 to 1. Sometimes it's 52 to 2. And when it's 51 to 1 or 52 to 2, then maybe the principal doesn't need to focus so much attention in that area to make changes. Maybe the principal's time is better spent addressing these areas that, you know, are more out of compliance. And so what happened here at Leonard Middle School was, even though this was a new approach, there was still a change in principal and a change in financial secretary. And so what we did here is we provided this information to her. We give them one basic recommendation, just saying, Here is the results of our compliance review. Please adjust your procedures to make sure they're in compliance. And here is here's our recommendations for corrective action. And here's the items where you can see what you're responsible for on the compliance spreadsheet. This has gotten really good feedback. It's reduced the amount of time it takes to perform these audits. And it's also made it more clearer for those principals so they can address the issues when they come up. Are there any questions on this process or the results of the audit?
Aaron, do we have a lot more, or are we going to keep pausing? I just want to double check.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can wait till the end to ask for questions if that's preferred.
I think so, because if not, I think we're going to end up taking a good while.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
I'll go
okay.
ahead and go forward.
Okay.
In the next slide, what we also looked at was the district hiring process. And so from discussions with you all in the risk assessment, this is an issue that's come up about ensuring that the district hiring process is effective and efficient, so that we're getting those individuals onto our district that are that quality that's going to move us up in the district. They're the best that we can get for the kids that we have. That's with teachers, principals, administration, things like that. And so what we did was we reviewed the time frame that it takes to hire individuals. We looked at the communication between these applicants and the district, and we looked at those processes that are entailed when it comes to hiring a teacher or it comes to hiring a non-teacher. And we discussed these with the new chief of HCM. And from those discussions, it seems that the new chief actually is aware of your concerns and has gone forward and started to make changes. He's done his analysis of the current operations, and he's making these changes for the most of the issues we've identified. And so to start this, we had two issues here. One was that time frame that we're first discussing. We looked at 91 new hires, and the time frame that it came on average was 62 days, and that ranged from 11 days to 89 days. And when we discussed this with HCM, yes, it was identified as an extended period of time. Also, another issue that we identified was the communication between a potential employee and the district. For example, I'm a teacher, I'm in the hiring pool, but I don't know my status. Am I still up for hire? Are there still principals that are still looking for? Just that communication between the district, that builds a reputation, lets them know that we are, thinking about them, makes us more attractive than maybe another district. So that's another item. And as I discussed before, the chief of HCM is aware of this. And so basically the recommendation is to keep going forward with the process he's already identified and not change things right now. We didn't make a recommendation in another way. Wanted to make sure that he's able to just keep going forward with his analysis and the identification of the new processes. On the next slide, there was an additional issue in this area, and that was with the hiring of non-teachers. And when we reviewed the process, it's very paper-driven, and there's a lot of documentation on top of that. And so what we look at with these processes is effectiveness and efficiency. Processes, very effective, right? It's effective in hiring an individual. It's effective that we're meeting all those HCM requirements, but the efficiency of it is not quite there. So the effectiveness is overlapping the efficiency with this process. And so it's taking an extended amount of time. One of the reasons that we saw that longer than usual average on the number of days to hire. So we discussed this with the HCM new chief. We suggested a committee be formed of the hiring managers so that they could see what's working, what's not working. We brought this to the HCM chief. At this time, he's aware of the issue, but he's focusing on the new hires for the teachers. So this item is an acceptance of risk with not making the changes right now currently. When we discussed this in the meeting, he did say he was aware, but he wanted to focus on the hiring of the teachers and get a win there before he brought it here to try to address the issues with the hiring of non-teachers. On the next slide, we have the results of the procurement card controls and expenditures. And so just to go over this, I'll let you go through the process of the procurement card. So when I say, hey, raise my hand, yes, I want a procurement card. How does that process work? First, you fill out an application. I fill out the application. Yes, I agree to take responsibility for this procurement card. What happens next? I go to training. When training is done, I fill out another form. yes, I've gone through training. Yes, I understand my responsibilities. And yes, I will follow the rules of the state and the district. Then I have my card. And then every year I'm going to budget a specific amount on that card. However, the money isn't on that card until I request procurement put a certain amount on that card. So they can't, there's no automatic funds on the procurement cards until procurement gets justification for a specific amount. And it's not the full amount of the budget either. After that, I leave the district, or I change positions, or I retire. That card is to be destroyed by the individual and deactivated by the district. And so when we review this process, I want to start off by saying that those expenditures, the monitoring over them, the insurance that procurement, that the controls that procurement has created with ensuring that they are adequate, that they are appropriate, and they were within our rules, came out with no issues. Everything is there. We didn't find any, we didn't identify any purchases that were out of line with the district requirements. And because of that, the other issues that we're going to discuss, the risk of those is lowered because we have that compensating control. And so what are these other issues? Well, the first comes with that initiation of the card, right? And what was happening when these forms were filled out, they were being lumped into the category of retention with financial documents. And so what that means is after they were filled out at the end of that year, plus 5 years, they were being destroyed. All right. Now we still had active individuals with active cards, but they didn't have that documentation in place anymore because it was being destroyed after 5 years. And so what happened there is we identified with the state records retention policy that they fall into a different category, right? One of them falls into the category where the documentation should be held until the last transaction plus 5 years. And one is till the date of separation from the employee. And so we recommended these changes be made to the retention with these documents. Procurement agreed, and they're making those changes right now. The other issue that we identified had to do with that final step with the deactivation. And so what we were finding is these individuals were separated from the district or retired, but their cards were still active. We hadn't deactivated them in the district with the bank that we have them with. And that ranged from anywhere between 3.5 months from separation to 3.5 years. Now, again, there is that compensating control where I can't spend money until procurement approves the amount that I'm requesting be put on that card. And also they're monitoring the expenditures. So if anything did pop up, they would catch it. However, those cards should be deactivated and off the account. And so we just recommended that that be done in a more timely fashion and that some kind of process be developed to identify when that's necessary. Again, management agreed, and they are in place of making those changes. The next slide that we have is over our capital improvement program update. And so what we do is every time we meet with the audit committee, we discuss the CIP program. We have a portion of our office is dedicated to 100% to reviewing, auditing CIP. And so every time we have a meeting with the audit committee, we give them an update exactly where we are with this. And so right now we're auditing Overton Park, Benbrook Middle School, and Amon Carter Riverside. We've just initiated these audits. And so we reviewed for compliance with the state district requirements for bids and those pre-contract required activities. Everything was in compliance. And then that report that we provided to you is just more information on exactly how everything was met. The final slide that we have is our follow-up activities. At this time, we didn't have anything that came up for follow-up. There's a little bit, there's a supplemental document to show you where internal audit is with addressing the issues. There were some issues that required the chief information officer to start. So we're currently working with him and discussing the time frame for implementing those corrective actions that were identified. That is the finale of the presentation. Are there any questions that y'all have for the information?
Looks like we have Trustee Norman Robbins with his hand up.
Thank you, President Ramos. I wanted my colleagues to be aware that during our audit committee meeting, as Aaron mentioned, we're still pretty much a pencil and paper outfit in terms of our HCM group. So I asked if it would be possible to identify some way of modernizing that process so it's more automated, so that we can be more efficient and lower the amount of time that it takes to hire both professional and non-professional employees. And that kind of a system is not inexpensive. So if they do explore that possibility, they would bring the results to us and we could decide whether or not it would be beneficial to us. But, you know, even small businesses these days are automated in their hiring process. Everything is automated. So an enterprise of our size should be the same. And it's just a matter of if it's affordable or if it makes sense for us to do it from a cost effectiveness standpoint. So I did want you all to be aware of that. Thank you.
No more questions from the board? I don't see any more hands raised. Mr. Munoz, appreciate your time. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you all.
Colleagues, we will now move on to number 5, which are action items. We'll begin with 5A, which is discussion and action to approve the TEA waiver request for missed school days due to inclement weather. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion by Trustee Jackson. I think I see a hand raised for a second by Trustee Luevanos.
Yes.
Thank you. I'll call, well, I'll just ask, do we have any discussion? No? Okay. We'll move to vote. Trustees, please say yes, no, or abstain as I call your name. Trustee Jackson?
Yes.
Trustee Phillips?
Yes.
Trustee Brookins?
Yes.
Trustee Evans is joining us by phone. I don't think she can communicate with us. Trustee Dar?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Robbins?
Yes.
Trustee Luevanos?
Yes.
Trustee Paz? And then I am Trustee Ramos, and I vote yes. So the motion will pass 8-4 and 0 against. We will move on to 5B, which is discussion and action to approve TEA waiver request, other waiver to receive full day minutes for days and district use 100% remote instruction due to inclement weather and or infrastructure issues related to inclement weather. Do I have a motion?
So moved, Jackson.
Thank you. We have a
Second.
motion. Thank you. We have a motion by Trustee Jackson. We have a second by Trustee Luevanos. Any discussion from the colleagues? Looks like no discussion from the board. As I will move the vote, as I call your names, trustees, please say yes, no, or abstain. Trustee Jackson?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Phillips?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Brookins?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Dar?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Robbins?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Luevanos?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Paz? I see a yes, and I am Trustee Ramos, and I will vote yes. Motion passes 8-4 and 0 against. Moving on to 5C, discussion and action to approve order declaring unopposed candidate elected to single member District 1. I have a motion. Motion by Trustee Paz. I have a second.
Second.
I have a second by Trustee Phillips. Any discussion from any of my colleagues? Looks like no discussion. We'll move to vote. Please, as I call your names, trustees, please say yes, no, or abstain. Trustee Jackson? Is that a yes? Trustee Jackson? You're on mute. Toby, you're on mute. There you go. Oh, you're back on mute. Hold on, do it again.
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yes by Trustee Jackson. Trustee Phillips?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Brookins?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Dar?
Yes.
Thank you. Trustee Robbins?
Yes.
Trustee Luevanos?
Yes.
Trustee Paz? Okay, and I'm Trustee Ramos, and I vote yes. Motion passes 8-4 and 0 against. We will now move on to our final item for the night, which is board training on racial equity. This evening, the board will participate in racial equity training, which will be facilitated by Ms. Breed and Dr. Benavides. And as they prepare and as they get ready to join us, I'll note to my colleagues on the board, modeling the Lone Star governance framework, where I am the genesis of transformation. I take full ownership for not having brought this training. I was just always in hopes that we could do this in person, that we could, be face to face. I got a couple of calls from some of you as to, this might be better in person. This would have been, just a good opportunity to have done it. Better late than never, hopefully. And also, as you all know, due to the changes in laws, we do this out front in the open for the public's convenience as well. And I have all the faith in Sherry Breed and Dr. Benavides, who have been doing tremendous work within and throughout the district and our community. I'll also say, I believe that this will just be to get us off the ground again. As we say in racial equity, this is an opportunity to strengthen our muscle on the toughest topic in our country. And so what we don't get to tonight, we can pick up again next month, knowing that sometimes this can be a heavy lift, but all the faith in the world with our colleagues. And so we'll turn it over to Ms. Breed and Dr. Benavides. And thank you, Dr. Scribner, as well, for joining us for the training.
Well, good evening, board trustees and Dr. Scribner. We really, on behalf of Dr. Benavides and myself, we really appreciate the opportunity to engage in conversations about the importance of having conversations about race. We also know that we are going to work together to help us build our racial consciousness, because we know that we're all in different places when it comes to racial consciousness. Some of us are much further down the road, and some of us are just beginning that awakening. So some time back, Dr. Scribner shared with you a reorganizational structure, and he moved the restorative practice team under the Division of Equity and Excellence. Well, what we found was our racial equity work and our restorative practice work aligned extremely well. So what we started to do is we use some of our restorative practice strategies when we engage in our racial equity work. This evening, we're not going to change that practice. So if you will allow me to read something to you. And as I read it to you, I really just want you to take it in and think about what comes up for you when you listen to this. The title is, "And How Are the Children?" Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors, Kasaria Ingara, one would always say to another. It means, "And how are the children?" It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that the Maasai always place on the children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer, "All the children are well." I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with the same daily question, "And how are the children?" I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how children are thought of or cared for in our country. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non-parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of all the children in our town, in our state, and in our country. The children are well. Yes, all the children are well. What would it be like if the president began every press conference, every public appearance by answering the question, "And how are the children, Mr. President?" If every governor of every state had an answer, had to answer the same question at every press conference, "And how are the children, Mr. Governor or Miss Governor? Are they all well?" Wouldn't it be interesting to hear their responses? And as we reflect on what you've heard and what resonates with you, if you would just drop in the chat, just might be something that came to your mind as you listened to that excerpt. And that was actually from a minister that was sharing his thoughts about keeping the children at the forefront of the conversation.
Thank you, Mrs. Breed. So if you'll just drop in the chat where you're at in thinking of that particular passage that Mrs. Breed just shared out. Good evening. Buenas tardes to our board members, Dr. Scribner. Thank you all so much for engaging in this conversation tonight. And I appreciate President Ramos for you kind of setting the tone for where we're moving in towards of learning and developing that racial consciousness. So as we get started, we really want to center ourselves in our values. So I would like for you to unmute yourself and share out what value do you bring into the space today. So I'll give you an example. My value is peace. Peace is freedom from abuse, ill treatment, stress, and anxiety. And so when I have peace in my life, I have a sense of calm, tranquility, and silence. And when I practice being peaceful, I also introduce restfulness, and that allows me to be able to be free of the noise around us. So what value do you bring into this space today? So we can go ahead and start. And if you don't mind, President Ramos, we'll start with you, and then whoever else wants to jump in and share out.
Oh, that's a good one. I don't think I've ever been asked that one like that. You got me hyped already. I'd say a value for me is patience. Patience in doing the hardest work that I think I've ever been tasked with doing and ever entrusted with doing. I catch myself wanting to move too fast, faster than what apparently the systems are able to move, and especially when we talk about this topic.
Thank you for that. In our chat for our audience who may be watching, Ms. Dar shared that the passage reminds her that our children are the most valuable resource. Mr. Phillips shared that I think the answer would default to the children are well without true thought being given to all children. So I appreciate your feedback on that. If I could get another panelist to share what value they bring into this space today, I'll let you unmute yourself and share out. And/or I can use my teaching skills and I can popcorn out and call on different students in this space today.
Appreciation.
Grace.
Grace, like that.
Can you repeat, Ms.
Paz? Ms. Paz, we're not able to hear.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. My word was courage.
If I could get one more person to share out, and when
Listening.
you share out, tell us how it resonates with you.
Listening.
Listening. Can you tell us, Mr. Luevanos, how that resonates with you?
Being able to listen to others to see how can you direct them in the right way, in the right path.
Thank you, Mr. Luevanos. I appreciate y'all all engaging in the conversation. If you did not get an opportunity to share out, please make sure you drop it in the chat, and when I get an opportunity, I'll share out with the public. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Freed.
All right, thank you. Ms. Inzar, if we could go to slide 3. And Mr. Luevanos, we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of listening. So thank you for bringing that value into our space today. So here we have an overview of what we're going to discuss today. And we hope to get to all of it, but we'll check in with you because we know that it may be a long evening for some of you. But we're going to talk a little bit about exactly what is racial equity and how we define racial equity in Fort Worth ISD. And then we're going to talk about the protocol, which is the tool that we use to have productive and meaningful conversations about race. We're going to have some time to practice with that. And then if we have the opportunity, we're going to have you share some experiences that you might have had when we talk about race. When we look at our learning outcomes for our training today, you will be introduced, as I've already said, to the Courageous Conversations about Race protocol, We hope that you're going to deepen your racial consciousness and that we have participants who have an opportunity to engage in those racial equity conversations. Now, we're going to pause a little bit and we want to just talk about the Courageous Conversations protocol. I recognize that many of you have been working with this and you're very familiar with it, so it'll just be a refresher, but there's some of you, I believe, that have not had the opportunity to see the protocol. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to just go through and introduce everyone to it, or refresh for those that have already had the training. Remember, there are 3 parts to the protocol. There's the compass, the agreements, and then there's 6 conditions. Let's turn our attention to the compass, if you will. There are 4 quadrants to the compass: believing, thinking, feeling, and acting. Believing, those are those values or beliefs, perhaps that you were taught or something as a child or something that you hold on deeply. That's when you find yourself sometimes when you're having the conversation, you might be in the beliefs. That doesn't align with my beliefs. When you're thinking that, when you're listening to conversations or engaging in the conversation. The feeling quadrant, that's going to be those emotions. And believe me, when you're having conversations about race, you're going to have some feelings and some emotions are going to come up. And often that's what leads people when you first just to say the word race sometimes brings the feelings into the quadrant. And then the acting. That's when you're putting your hands, feet, you want to do something. You want to be engaged in something about the racial equity work. Like you all are acting because you're engaging in the conversation through your training today. Some of us are doing all kinds of things when we talk about acting in the acting quadrant. And then thinking, that's where your mind is. What thoughts are coming up when you're engaging in the conversation? Sometimes may take you into, I want to just check out of this conversation. And that's when we have to really interrogate where we are and why we want to check out of the conversation. And now let's take a look at the agreements. There are 4 agreements to the protocol. The first is staying engaged. Now, I don't mean just I'm participating, I'm giving eye contact. We want more than that. We want you to bring those emotions, those feelings to the conversation, because that's when we go deep into the conversation about race. And we really engage in the conversation of what our beliefs are and how we get to know others as racial beings. And then speak your truth. Remember, that's not someone else's truth. It's your lived experience. So we always acknowledge, and you're never wrong when you are speaking your truth, because that's your lived experience. And then we have to give grace and the acknowledgement that we accept others when they're speaking their truth, because their truth may be different than our lived experience and the truth that we've experienced. And then allow yourself to experience discomfort. Yes, we say in our trainings, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because you're going to experience discomfort, and allow yourself. But as I said a few minutes ago, when you're experiencing discomfort, try to take time to think about, now, why am I experiencing discomfort? Why is this uncomfortable for me? And then expect and accept non-closure. This is really what the hardest one for me to maintain. Let me just say that up front. I'd like to take that off my to-do list. I'd like to say it's tied up, I've completed it. When you're engaging in conversations about race, often you're not going to end the conversation. So we have to expect and accept non-closure. But what's important to remember is that although you're not going to finish the conversation, we agree that we're going to come back and continue the conversation, so that we are not just ending it and saying, we agree to disagree. No, we agree that we're going to come back and discuss the conversation further. And then the conditions. Our goal, we will be going through some conditions today and introducing some of you to it and refreshing some of your memories for others. But we said 1 through 4, we'll check in with you to see how you feel and see if we can continue on. One thing I want to just go back to the compass, if you will allow me. One of the main things about the compass is to remember to find the other person on the compass. It's really to help you regulate how you are going to engage in the conversation. For example, if I am in talking to someone and they clearly are in the feeling quadrant, I don't need to be in the feeling quadrant also. I need to center myself so that I can meet them where they are and we can have a productive conversation about whatever the topic is, but primarily around race when we are using the protocol. Next slide, Ms. Enzar. When engaging in these conversations, we always think it's important that we ground ourselves with some definitions of some of the terms that we use, because so often we use these terms in different ways. So for the context of our conversation today, when we're going to talk about race, we just want to remember that race is a social construct of individuals based on skin color. Now, it may not be only on skin color. It could be eye color, hair texture, but primarily for our conversation today, it is going to be about skin color. Racism. Any act that unwittingly tolerates, notice that word tolerates, or accepts or reinforces racially unequal opportunities or outcomes for our children to thrive and learn. Privilege, a right or an advantage that is given to some people and not to others. And whiteness, the component of each and every one of ourselves that expects assimilation to the dominant culture. And what I want to be sure, I pause here, when we talk about whiteness, remember this said of each and every one of ourselves to assimilate to the dominant culture. I didn't say white people, I said whiteness. So I did also want to just share a little bit about that there are, if you would go deeper into that, Robin DiAngelo also has a definition that she uses for whiteness. Next slide. So is it possible for me to get one of our brave trustees to read this passage for us?
Racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted, in a statistical sense, how one fares. We are thinking about racial equity as one part of racial justice, and thus we also include work to address root causes of inequities, not just their manifestation. This includes elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce different outcomes by race or fail to eliminate them.
Thank you, Trustee Robbins. And thank you so much for reading that. And if I could call your attention to that second paragraph, notice that it does point out the elimination of all of policies, practices, attitudes, cultural messages, all of these things. Now, Trustee Ramos said, we're going to do some heavy lifting. That's heavy lifting when you have to look at all of those things that we're trying to eliminate. But this is the definition that we have developed and we have chosen to use when we describe racial equity in Fort Worth ISD. These are some terms that often come up, and I know that probably you all have also heard this. We hear individuals use these as the same. These two words, equal or equality and equity, are truly very different terms. Equality, that is when we are giving, if you look at the visual that's on the screen, we're giving all students the same level of support. And for this picture, the end goal happens to be to see over the fence because they're trying to see the baseball game. But if we give everyone the same opportunities, look at the little guy standing there. Is he being successful? Because we're giving everyone the same. And he may need a little more support and scaffolding to help him be successful in whatever the end goal is. Now, when we talk about equity, we're ensuring that we're giving every student what they need in order for them to be successful. And if you look at the middle picture, then you see one student didn't really need any scaffolding, but is still being successful. Then we see another student needed a little bit, and you see that by that one box there. But then the little guy that we were looking at earlier, he's able to be successful also because now he has what he needs to help him see over the fence. And what we are trying to get to is actually liberation, where there's no fence, there's no barriers. Everyone has access to all opportunities to help them be successful and reach whatever goal they might have. Let's take a little bit of time and turn our attention to looking at data. You know, we're educators, so we always look at our data. Here are some STAR data from 2019, and this is all of the data that we would have for all of our students. And this happens to be with the reading data. 32,637 students did not meet grade level expectation on the STAR reading exam last year. 92% of those students were Black or Brown, and that's 29,911. That's, yes, I saw the question in the chat. Ms. Dar, this is Fort Worth ISD data from 2019. So I really just want you to think about that stark reality. That was really an eye-opener for, I think for all of us, but for me as I looked at it, when we see it in these numbers. Now, let's turn our attention to a little bit of our discipline data. If you look at the left side of the slide, we have discipline data for all Fort Worth ISD students. And it is, if you look at the legend that's there in the middle of the slide, you see that we have the blue. These are bar graphs, of course, did you know that? Black students are identified by blue, Hispanic or Latinx are in the yellow, and white are identified by the green bars. What I really want you to be aware of, the slides or the bars on the left are all Fort Worth ISD students. And notice the Fort Worth ISD out of school suspension and the Fort Worth ISD in school suspension. Notice that in the in school suspension, 37% of our African American students received that consequence for whatever the misbehavior was, as compared to 56% of our Hispanic students. And then we can see that in our white students is far less. Then when we look at our out of school suspension for students, 50% of our African American students received out of school suspension and 45% of their Hispanic students. Now, in looking at the data to our right, the discipline, this is the students that are identified with disabilities. Look at those same areas that we looked at for the general population. Out of school suspension. 49% of the African American students with identified with disabilities received out of school suspension. When we look at the in school suspension, 40% received in school suspension as a consequence. I point this out to you so you can notice that the data is very similar for in school and out of school for our general students, as well as for our students with disabilities. And that begs us to, or reminds us the importance. It's not about disabilities. The conversation is about race and the beliefs that we hold about some students.
All right, so we're gonna do a quick mindful minute because you've just heard a lot of information, and I want to make sure that we are checking in on the compass as well. And this is also part of our restorative practices. So I want you to just pause real quick, and we're going to take a deep breath, and we're going to inhale for 4, hold it for 4, and exhale for 4. You ready? Here we go. In, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. As you reflect on the information that Mrs. Breed shared with you, and she also reviewed the Compass protocol, where do you right now fall? Where does it put you? If I could get 1 or 2 of our panelists to share out, are you in believing, thinking, feeling, acting, based on what you've learned so far?
Acting. As President Ramos said at the beginning, we're ready to go. We've talked about this for years and years. I still remember Mother Moss talking about this 10, 15 years ago, and we're still talking. Now we're finally moving into action, and it's gratifying, but it just can't come fast enough.
Thank you for that, Mr. Robbins. Go ahead, Mr.
I feel like I'm vacillating between thinking and feeling. When you present data like that, it takes, I have to absorb that. The data puts me in my thinking quadrant, but then I jump over to the feeling quadrant of how can this be? And and these are children, and how are we meeting their needs as effectively as possible if we've got kids that are out of school and suspended. So that puts me into my feeling quadrant. So I'm toggling back and forth right now, which probably isn't the way this compass is designed to work, but that's where I am.
That's okay, actually.
That's right.
Because we're
Thank
not
you for
always
speaking your
going to be
truth.
centered. Absolutely. So thank you for that. And the goal is eventually to get us centered. So where we're between all of those and we go into productivity zone. President Ramos, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Trustee Dar, I mean, that's completely how this compass is supposed to work, right? That we acknowledge where we're at. And so for me, I begin in the feeling quadrant, especially as I look at the discipline numbers and think about my career, 21 years at the juvenile facility, and having lived into that space of so many children of color, in my perspective, in my opinion at that time, the over-disciplining that was happening by school systems in Tarrant County. I go to the thinking quadrant and I begin to think, what in the world am I doing? I've been here 8 years and I'm beginning to sound like Mama Moss, where, what does that look like? Why have I not moved the needle? What have I not done? So to bring into governance, I am the genesis of transformation. So why do those numbers continue to be that way? I was frustrated. I was angry. I made a lot of strong comments as a board member, especially in my earlier years. And then the acting quadrant, which to me is the reason why governance is the key, that we move as one collective unit to really move that needle. And then I'll finalize with the believing quadrant. I'm struggling to not allow myself to believe that I'm not moving a needle. And that's devastating for me, that I've been here 8 years and those third grade reading scores, right when this board got on governance, right when the superintendent and administrative team were finding their groove, COVID hits. And now we've taken a major setback. So I'm all over the compass. I'm not centered. And it only takes a handful of slides for you to put them up there for me to get off center.
Which is why I did the mindful minute and taking a deep breath, because it is a lot of information. And I appreciate all of you speaking your truth. And our goal, hopefully today, was for you to start to begin to feel empowered and engage in the conversations that have to be had so that we can move in the direction that all of you are sharing today. So if you'll please go to the next slide. So that brings us to engaging in the conversation. And so as we move into our first two conditions, we have to understand why it's imperative that we use this framework. Race, especially in today's context, is probably one of the hardest things or topics for us to have to talk about. And oftentimes conversations tend to avoid talking about race, but instead we incorporate labels like socioeconomic status, urban, gender, sex, class. The reality is that race is the #1 predictor of our student success, and we must learn how to confront it as it is a reality. In the next few slides, we're going to unpack what we mean by condition 1 and 2 and how to practice using them. And again, empowering you to do so. As a Latina, race and racism is deeply embedded in the fabric of our society and has an impact in my family's life every single day. You'll go to the next slide, please. So part of your homework was to have an opportunity to review the core assumptions. If by raising your hand, you'll let me know if you did not have an opportunity to do so, and I can give you at least 2 minutes to review those core assumptions, because it's really going to be important for you to engage in the conversation and know what those core assumptions are. So if you could raise your hand and let me know if you need 2 minutes to do that. Okay. All right, I'll give you 2 minutes. I'm gonna put it on the timer and we'll get started in 2 minutes. That way you can review them real quickly.
Where are they? I don't remember getting this assignment.
It was part of the packet that we sent out about a week ago. I can try to drop it in the chat if you'd like me to. Would that be helpful?
I guess I've never seen this, I don't believe.
I'm gonna drop that in the chat for you, and you should be able to open it up right now.
Thank you.
Always have the backup plan.
Thank you.
All right, I'll give you about 30 more seconds and then we'll get started. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you before we get started on this core assumption activity is that we're going to use one of our restorative practices components, which is what we call a circle. Our RP team uses this component as a method to build relationships, community, and go deep into conversations so that we can utilize multiple perspectives. One of the ways we can advance our equity vision is by cultivating adult and student practices for those who are furthest from the opportunity, in turn to create more inclusive school communities. This past week, we were part of a training, and we talk a lot about the achievement gap, but they framed it as furthest from the opportunity as a way for us to think about it in a positive way to help support our students. So promoting equity through SEL requires intentional efforts that begin with individual beliefs and results in collective action, which is why I'm using Circle today. This core assumption activity is designed to encourage reflection and deep beliefs so that we can become more intentional on our behaviors. So through this activity, we also become more aware of the core assumptions of which each of us has insight on and how we see the world. The core assumptions are the basic ideas we, as restorative practitioners, believe to be true about human nature and our relationship with the world. The core assumptions are also grounded in wisdom and cultural traditions from around the world and guides the practice we use to help us build healthy relationships. And so with that, I'm going to give you some guidelines since we are going to practice the circle protocol. First of all, I ask that you bring your best self to this circle. And what is said in the circle stays in the circle. That is our guideline. But in this case, we are public. So public, you are a part of our circle today. We use one mic. We mute the mic when we're not speaking. And I'm going to ask. So let's say it's Miss Dar who goes first. Miss Dar, you would call on Miss Jackson next. And then Miss Jackson would call on the next person so that we can pass it around the circle. Okay. We honor the values of everyone in this group. And we talked about what those values were before we began today. We have to expect and accept non-closure. And so please reflect on your CCA protocol that Mrs. Breed introduced to you today. So before we begin, I want you to really reflect on the 7 different core assumptions that you read. And Mrs. Breed, I'm going to have them check in as part of our circle protocol. In honor of Women's History Month, tell us about a woman that you admire. You can either unmute yourself and share out, or you can drop it in the chat and I will share out with the public. So this is our first check-in question. In honor of Women's History Month, tell us about a woman that you admire. I'll share and I'll model for you. The woman that I admire the most is my mother. She is the person who showed and mentored me who I am and have become today.
I admire Hazel Harvey Peace, who I had the privilege and pleasure of working with for quite a number of years on a number of projects that the Communities in Schools organization was pursuing many, many years ago. And really admired her thought process, her grace. She had a lot of grace, and her ability to, she knew how the cow ate the cabbage. You didn't blow smoke at Ms. Peace. She knew what you were about. She could sense what you were about and feel what you were about. So I very much admired that and miss her.
Thank you for that. Mr. Phillips dropped at the chat. He said, the woman I admire the most is my wife, DeAndrea Phillips. She literally is the most intelligent human I have ever met. Thank you for that, Mr. Phillips. Anybody else want to share out one more? Go ahead, Ms. Paz.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to keep it personal, local, and immediate, and I would like to recognize Mrs. Breed, and how much I admire her, and just for the length of time that she has worked here in Fort Worth ISD, and and literally transformed herself from her throughout her journey, and especially now as the leader of this department and leading this work, and just watching how she has grown and how she has challenged not only herself but also me and everyone around her, and it's not been easy work. So that's who I admire.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Paz. So you kind of get the idea of the circle. Now for the next round of questions, I would like for everyone to participate. Again, you can pass if you're not ready to answer the question, but I'd like as many people to participate as possible. So here's your first question in regards to the core assumptions. I want you to choose one of the core assumptions and tell us your reaction to that assumption and how it resonates with you. And to kick us off, do we have a volunteer who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Thank you, Dr. Scribner.
Sure. So I was very pleased to read those. I read them for the first time in the chat box because at the beginning when you said for us to share our values, the value I wanted to share was connection, because I think that is really what we're talking about when we uncover and peel back all of the perceived differences in the social construct. And when I think of connection in this work with a team of 10, I think that each one of our trustees individually are good people here for the right reasons with a heart for our children. And so my goal personally and professionally is to use this value of connection to help each one of the 9 align his or her efforts toward the greater good so that we as a team are all pulling the rope in the same direction. So connection is a piece that I really connected with.
Thank you, Dr. Scribner. Who do you want to pass it to?
I will pass it to Q Phillips.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Scribner. So I find myself when I read these that I agree with all of them pretty wholeheartedly, except for the only one where I have pauses and trouble really grasping and having full belief in is everything we need to make positive changes already. Like, I want to believe that, but it just feels like something is missing all the time from this work. Even when President Ramos kind of spoke a little bit earlier about his time, I haven't been on the board as long, but just in lifelong community advocacy, or whether it be on this board or wherever it is, and having this fight for racial justice, for equity, for equality, it always feels like something is just missing from the equation to push us over the top, where this is something that truly sticks and holds, and we see that day that we dream about and hope coming. And so I don't know what that is fully. I feel like the intellect is there. I feel like people is there. There's heart. We kind of know what to do, but it always eludes us in getting it done. And I don't know what that missing piece is. So I struggle with that particularly.
Thank you for that. Would you like to pass it to Mr. Phillips?
I would like to pass it to Trustee Luevano.
Thank you.
I'll come back.
Who do you want to pass it to, Mr. Luevanos?
Toby?
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Luevanos. When I look at the first one, the true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful. I believe it demonstrates to everyone here how important the work is with children, because every time we injure or don't make the best decisions here, a child forms a wall, and that covers the true self. And while it is still good, wise, and powerful, and they are very resilient, we shouldn't put them in that condition or that situation.
Right.
Whether or not that's right or wrong, Dr. Benavides, that's what I see every day when I work, and that's what I believe every day. And I believe we have great educators in this district, and I believe they can do so much more if we can do what Trustee Phillips said, find out what is the missing piece that gets us over the, I don't know if you said hump, edge, or finish line, but whatever you said, Trustee Phillips, I agree.
All of the above, huh?
Well, thank you for covering me. Oh, I get to hand it off. I will hand it off to, I don't see anybody waving. I hand it off to Trustee Brooks.
I'm assuming she said my name. It got cut off.
Yeah, she did. She did.
Okay. Okay. So the assumption that I chose was all humans have gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that our life experiences are that's our journey to find our gift. And then when we do find it, that is the time that we should either pay it forward or give that gift away.
Thank you.
And that's when you know that you have found your passion.
Thank you.
Who are you going to pass it to, Ms. Brookins?
I'm going to pass it to, oh, CJ can't talk. Oh, okay. Anne.
Thank you, Daphne. I actually, the one that spoke to me the loudest was the same one about gifts. And I think your words were very profound and spot on. I'm going to put a little different spin on it because I think that the true leadership brings out the gifts in other people. And from the board to Dr. Scribner, to the leadership team, to the executive directors, to the administrators on campus, to the teachers in the classroom, that to be good leaders is to bring out those gifts in other people and to empower other people all the way down to those students, because I want students to know that they too have gifts and that they are powerful and that they are competent and capable, and to feel empowered to be the best that they can be. So to kind of piggyback on what you said and to turn it around just a little bit, all being valid, that we as leaders need to be empowering others to find those gifts and to use those gifts and to know that every one of those gifts is equally as important. It doesn't matter what your job is or where your place is or what your role is or what your financial status is. Every single person has gifts that are critically important.
Thank you, Ms. Dar. I think we still have a few trustees left. Who do you want to pass it to, Ms. Dar?
I will pass it to Cinto. Have you done this yet?
No. I too, as Dr. Scribner, this is my first time seeing the core assumptions, and I love them. I'm going to zero in on the one that Trustee Phillips, said he probably had the hardest time, and I think that's the one that spoke to me the loudest. And the reason why I'm in this tug of war internally. I think about the book Adaptive Leadership that I often reference in speeches about the myth of a broken system. And in essence, that book, Adaptive Leadership, talks about the reality is that the system isn't broken by accident, that it's broken on purpose, that there are enough people with positional power or influence who will keep it the way it is. And the question for me is in doing that kind of studying is then who's keeping it that way? Who's keeping the disparities in place? who's keeping the resources and the opportunities from young people, because I do believe innately that every human being that enters this space has really great qualities and that we are all interconnected. What I question then are whose agendas and whose motives, or even specifically to use the governance model, what agendas do I have and what motives do I have that I may be keeping the system broken? So before I'm quick to point fingers at everyone else around me, I'm also in self-analysis mode of how am I? I'm in a position of power and influence. And so what is it that I am or am I not doing that's keeping this system broken? And as I take deep dives into that, I think that I'm breaking my own heart sometimes. So, I also see all the interconnected pieces to all of the other core assumptions. So Dr. Benavides and Sherry Breed, you got me in the feelings and the thinking quadrant right now.
Well, and that's really the point of this particular activity, so that y'all can reflect together as a team where you land, where your beliefs are, your insight that you have, so you can learn more about each other and start to cohesively make some of those decisions based on who you are as human beings. I know there's a few more trustees who have not gone. Would you like to go, Mr. Lovenos? Go ahead. I see you.
Yes, for me it was the same one as Daphne and Dar. So I really have come to realize that everyone has and brings a gift. We always learn from each other, and I find it amazing what we can learn from children and from other people. So that we are not familiar with, that people that we get to meet. So everyone has a different gift, and I feel empowered when I learn from the diverse thinking of others.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Mr. Robbins, did you get a chance to go? I didn't know if we had already had an opportunity to call on you.
No, and we'll go with Mrs. Jackson's. Every child comes to us, with a true goodness to them. Now, some of them have had experiences that probably we wish they may not have had, but they're all great little people, and somehow over the period of time, we managed to ruin some of them, and that just breaks my heart to see that happen. And I know it's not all our fault, but we have a tremendous opportunity to make sure that all of our children are successful. From the get-go, they come to us just unblemished, and we've got to make sure that we take them wherever they are and bring them as far as they're able to go.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins.
Appreciate that.
I think that's all of our trustees for this first round. Did I miss anybody? Ms. Paz, go ahead, Ms. Paz. Thank you. Oh, you're on mute.
Nope.
Okay, how's that?
That's
Better?
good.
Okay, I'm having problems over here with my mute button. So all of these really resonate with me. I think the two of them really stick out a lot. The number 2, the world is profoundly interconnected. That is something that I, carry as a personal belief. And, in the last few years, I've been studying up on Buddhism, not as a religion, but as a practice. And Buddhism really relies on the idea of interconnectedness, and then also the fact that of the idea of interdependence, that we are all dependent on each other. None of us exist just solely on our own. I could not be the person that I am without the relationships that I've built and the experiences that I've built. And I think that really touches on the core of a lot of these things. But I think the most important one for me is actually the last one, the number 7, that we need practices to build habits of living from the core self. And that goes back to even our governance work and the idea that, if we were going to truly govern with integrity, we have to be practicing integrity, and that no one is expected to be perfect all the time. Which is why I really appreciate what Mr. Robbins said, that he's bringing grace into this, because you can't have these conversations without extending grace to the other, to everyone around you, and also to yourself. But the fact that governing with integrity and acting with integrity, and even whether it's through having solid governance practices or increasing your racial consciousness, it takes practice, and it takes undoing a lot of the behaviors that we have learned up until now. So that's the one that really sticks with me.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paz. So that's going to be the close of this first round of the circle. And I just want to say you've been super reflective, staying engaged and speaking your truth. I really appreciate that. I'm going to pass second round over to Mrs. Reed.
Thank you, Dr. Benavides. And just listen to this question. And I think you all are embracing the restorative practice, and I appreciate that. What other core assumptions, not on this list, that you bring that are important guideposts for you in your work with children or with people? Let me repeat that again. What other core assumptions, not on this list, are important guideposts for you in your work with children and other people? Mrs. Dar.
That all children can learn. And as someone who has devoted her professional life to children with disabilities, that is just something that I didn't make it up. It's something that we all need to be reminding ourselves of every single day. All children can learn. And some children may learn because they have specially designed instruction, and some children may learn because they need a GT program, and some children need both specially designed instruction and a GT program. But all children can learn and succeed.
I appreciate it. And what was the last thing you said, Mrs. Dar?
And succeed.
And succeed. Okay. Thank you for sharing that and speaking your truth. Let's get a few more. Ms. Dar, who would you like to pass it on to? We'll keep with that strategy.
Oh, the power. I'm going to pass it on to Daphne.
It's Ms. Brickett.
Okay, repeat the question again.
Sure. What core assumptions, not on this list, are important guideposts for you in your work with children and or people? Now, in the circle, one of the things you can do, if you need a little time to reflect, you can pass it and allow us to come back to you.
Just have an open mind, and don't come in with preconceived notions.
Thank you, Mrs. Perkins. Appreciate that. Thank you for sharing. Let's take a couple more. And Ms. Brookins, did you have someone you'd like to pass it to?
I'd like to pass it to Ms. Jackson.
Well, thank you, Trustee Brookins. I believe that children are born with intrinsic motivation. And I believe if we nurture that intrinsic motivation, that we can allow them to self-regulate. And that changes everything when you look at restorative discipline practices and reduces the need for such. So that's an area of interest for me, is self-regulation through supportive, loving, caring adults in classrooms.
Thank you so much for putting that in the space. Who would you like to pass it to, Ms. Jackson? Now you got the power.
Power is force times distance divided by time, so I need to go fast. Trustee Phillips.
Trustee Jackson, you're too smart. Yeah, I guess that all of this matters. That it matters. That it's not in vain. That the ball is being pushed forward. That expending its energy, fighting the good fight, is making a difference for someone in some way. And then just in my personal beliefs, the battle is not mine, it's the Lord's. So just do my part.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Phillips. Would you like to pass it to someone? We'll take one more.
Dr. Scribner.
And Mr. Leobanos, I'm going to come to you because I saw your hand. Dr. Scribner.
Thank you, Q. I would say that we, all of us here, have the responsibility to disrupt the systems and disrupt the conditions that got us here in the first place. We make decisions all the time as a school system, and we get the pressures, political pressures, and I think it's important that we take a step back sometimes, disconnect from the conflict, from get back into the thinking quadrant, disconnect from the feeling quadrant for a moment, and recognize that that sometimes those pressures are coming at us as a result to maintain the system as it already exists. And it's our job to disrupt that system and from an equity lens, put the resources where they need to be. We learned at several of our leadership academies who had been underperforming for 5 and 6 years that the kids were never the problem to begin with. You get high quality instruction, longer school day, more investment in resources, and we can see the change there, as well as some of our other schools who are not leadership academies, but who are achieving in spite of the predictive racial and socioeconomic predictors that we see all the time. So we have a responsibility to disrupt this. And I will turn it over to Anael.
I believe service and compassion. If we serve and care about all children, we want them to learn and to succeed. And we will do, like Dr. Skinner said, whatever it takes to make sure that they all succeed and beyond high school. We are public servants, so we at the service of the public or constituents.
Thank you so much for sharing, for all of you that shared out into the space. And, that's one of the things about the circle. It does help us connect. I think Dr. Scribner used that term. He said the connectiveness, getting to know one another in a deeper way. Well, in closing out our circle for today, I have something I'd like to share with you. If you have come here to help me, you are wasting our time. But you have come because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together. I want you to remember that this is the beginning of a process. We will continue to meet and support these conversations necessary to build relationships in equitable ways. And we're building these relationships to help us foster in the community and ensuring that all of our students are going to be successful. And with that, we close out our circle for this evening.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Breed. So I want to encourage you to remember that your liberation is bound with students that we serve, and our focus is to prepare the best versions of themselves. And so with that, we have started to practice really engaging in the conversation. And so we're going to go into condition 1. And I'll just give you a really quick definition of condition 1. So race is a tough topic, like we've talked about already. And if we're not careful when we head into these courageous conversations, we can recognize that there could be harm or trauma that could be caused, right? So with that being said, condition 1 allows us to keep the topic of race and racism personal, local, and immediate. So my lived experience is not going to necessarily be your lived experience. So to successfully do this in a courageous conversation, I want you to avoid things like we our, they, them. Instead, I want you to focus on I. When you do this, or when you use these words, the focus should be on your personal experiences and not what you believe to be the experiences of others. So speak your personal, local, and immediate and perspective and only use I. So I want you to try to catch yourself. So if we start to engage publicly and share out with practice and you use the word we, I may stop you and ask you to try again, okay? So let's go ahead and go to the next slide and we're going to practice what that looks like. We're going to watch a video, and then after we watch the video, I want you to think about this, keeping it personal, local, and immediate. What came up for you when you were watching this video? And so, Ms. Enzar, will you please go ahead and play the video for us, and then we'll discuss. Just a fair warning, there is one cuss word on there.
Can you turn on the captioning?
To say I am not virtuous is one thing. To say I am without virtue is entirely different. Worlds apart. I have parts of worlds in me. I learned about honor in the 3rd grade, Mr. Ham's class. It was the hardest word for my tongue to trace, for I knew what it meant. I just didn't know how to get it. So I took my last name and the word honor and learned the two were exactly the same shape. But unlike my name, I had to earn honor first. So I carried my surname like a samurai sword and swore it would keep me safer. It was both what I was protecting, what would protect me. When I was 10 years old, nobody could pronounce my last name. I guess it had to do with the fact that all of my friends were white. No, maybe that's unfair. Okay, no, actually, it's because all of my friends were white. So at 10 years old, I stopped caring what my name sounded like. It became white noise and white mouths, and I was too afraid to be too brown in front of them. So I drowned out the voices, watched my honor stumble and be slain. Every time someone dropped my name on its head, I told myself it was funny and forced a laugh so loud it could cloud the culture. I did not want to consume me. Yes, haha, my last name is very Mexican. Yes, it is all over the Taco Cabana bathrooms. No, it doesn't mean bathroom. You can just say caballero if it's easier. What I didn't realize is I wasn't just shaving my name to whatever shape these strangers' tongues preferred. I was ripping my grandfather's calloused hands apart when he gave this name to my father to give to his son's pops. I apologize for all the times I did not think twice, for all the times I refused to speak up, for all the times I did not protect what Grandpa gave to you to give to me. Daddy, I am so sorry for being so selfish. I now know my name is where my honor lays. It was born in a one-story house in Lockhart, Texas. I have learned how to wield its blade, so you will learn how to say my name, caballero. It means gentleman. It means night, not like the sky or an absence of light, but honor is my birthright. We'll get this right. In Spanish, the double L makes a yeah sound. The ER makes a the sound. Caballero, when you say my name, let it scrape across your tongue like you are paving an ancient highway to take you somewhere you've never been. I will take you somewhere you've never been. I like my name. It's cute. I like being cute. But if you say caballo, cabrillo, cabrero, that shit is not cute. When you say my name, let it hang in your throat like a cloud of smoke on a rainy day. Rising from the flames I set when I set myself on fire inside of your cheeks, hoping leave a spark in your teeth. So next time we speak, you feel my name sting like it's something you don't ever want to forget. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Enzar. So again, I'm going to ask you the question one more time, thinking about personal, local, and immediate. What comes up for you when you watch this video? And I want you to share if you have an experience with name. And this is our practice part, okay? Keeping it local, personal, and immediate, using I statements only. All right, go ahead, Mr. Lebanos.
I appreciate the fact that teachers at INA and PASCO took the time to learn how to pronounce my name and how to pronounce my last name. And I feel sad when some colleagues on this board mispronounce my name, and the answer was when other people correct them, like, oh, whatever that's called. So that was very sad for me, that moment when someone didn't took the time to learn how to pronounce my last name, or to even try to pronounce my first name.
Thank you for that. Thank you for
speaking your truth.
Do I have another volunteer to practice personal, local, and immediate?
I'll do it.
Go ahead, Ms. Wilkins.
When I saw the scene that just went off, it brought back some memories of something similar happening to me with my name. Because Daphne is not an ethnic name, I felt like a lot of doors have been opened for me because of that. But then once you get through those doors, some of those same doors have been closed because they realized that Daphne was a Black person and not what they preconceived by the name. So it definitely brought some emotions back. Hearing him, I understood exactly where he was coming from.
Thank you for that, Ms. Brookins. And so that's what I mean by those personal experiences, those lived experiences. That is a great, both of those are really great examples of keeping it personal, local, and immediate. President Ramos, you had your hand raised?
No, my colleagues have said a great deal, and I don't, that spoke to my heart. So now we good.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Ms. Denzar, we're going to go ahead and go on to the next, and we're going to show you some practice using mindful inquiry when we are talking about personal, local, and immediate. Go ahead, Ms. Reed.
When you're engaging in conversations about race, it is critically important to be what I call really intense, deep listening. And these are some tools that we use often because sometimes the perspective that may be being shared with an individual that I'm engaging in that conversation is, and in many of our trainings, we're coming in, we don't know where people are necessarily when we first walk in the door. So I need to have some tools. I think you will appreciate these tools. This is the art of mindful inquiry. And these are some of the question stems that you can use to help you really hear what the person is trying to say. Because sometimes the conversation may be a little bit tense and you really need to use that compass, center yourself, and then use some of these things. So I'm just going to point out a few of them. So, you probably have heard before when you might stop and pause and say, okay, what I heard you say was, and then repeat using that person's, what the terminology or the words they use. So they have the opportunity at that time to say, yes, that's what I said, or, well, that may be what I said, but what I meant was, so they can correct you and go further. Or you, as you're listening, when you are so in tune to what they're saying, and you said, tell me more about what you meant by. When you said, like if I was talking to the young man, the snippet of the video we just saw, I might would say, tell me more about what you meant by when you said your name meant knight and honor. Tell me more about that, because that intrigued me. Or what about even some of you that just sharing your lived experience? What hurt you about what happened? Actually, Mr. Luebanos did share what hurt him about that we don't take the time, and people have not taken the time to learn how to correctly pronounce his name. I have found this to be very beneficial, not only in conversations about race, but in other conversations. Because speaking my personal, local, and immediate, so often when, as an administrator, when someone was coming and talking to me in something that they needed me to assist with, I was listening. I may have been looking at them, but I was already formulating what was going to be my solution. What was I going to do? What actions was I going to take? All of that. So which means I had stopped listening and I was already down the road thinking about what actions I was going to take. So I had to learn to stop And some of you, well, maybe not with board trustees or the superintendent, but some I might say, wait, let me handle this so I can give you my complete attention and listen to what you're saying. And these are, you're going to have to see which ones are the ones that fit the situation that you're in. Because then at the end, you might have something to say, how did that affect you? Or to get to the end, what is it that you need or you want? And sometimes you have to even unpack that, because some individuals may not know exactly what it is they want. So that causes you to go into a little deeper conversation. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, these are also really helpful ways to communicate. Now, some of them seem simplistic, but it's good reminders for all of us. Like after you've had that conversation, or maybe even when you're during the conversation, reflect on what the person said. I often do that now. After I've had a conversation and think about it, I get home or other than nothing. What did I hear them say? What did I really hear them say? And then reminder, begin where they are, not where you want them to be. Because when we're in conversations about race, we have to meet people where they are and then start the conversation, engage in it from that point on. And then a little further down the list, when it's conflict that's occurring, take responsibility for your part in the conflict or the misunderstanding or whatever the conversation is in relation to. What was my part so that I can own that? And then I can say, I accept that part of it. Now let's talk about what we can do to go forward. And then kind of this one speaks to me all the time. The last one, stay with the process and the relationship, not just the solution. That's critical. Not just the solution. And that's what I was trying to get to sometimes, but I'm learning. I'm doing much better. Now, for the sake of time, Dr. Benavides and I are going to role play what a conversation would look like using mindful inquiry. Now, while we're role playing this, I want you to keep this what it might look like for you all as board trustees. But for us, we're going to model a situation where a parent has come in and she's frustrated. I'm going to play the role of the parent. And I'm frustrated because I feel like I'm not being heard and I need some help. Dr. Benavides is going to play in the role of the campus administrator, trying to hear me and then help me get to what it is that I want from the school. So you'll have to give us feedback on our acting abilities in just a little bit. Okay, Dr. Benavides. Dr. Benavides, I've been up to the school 3 or 4 times and I need help. My son is really struggling in his classes and I work, so I really need some help.
All right, so Mrs. Breed, I am sorry to hear that. What I'm hearing you say is that maybe you've been trying to get a hold of the school and you've not been able to reach to a teacher to find out how we can help support your son.
That's correct. I've come up to the school this time all the time because I work and this is the best time for me to come. I can't take off work. And I realize this is not the teacher's planning period, but it's important for me to have a conversation because my son is really struggling in math.
I totally understand that. So what do we need to do to help assist you so that your son can be successful?
If you could help me have a conversation with the teacher at the time when I can be present at the school, I would really appreciate it because I need to make a decision whether I'm going to continue with virtual instruction or if I need to consider bringing my child back to the face-to-face instruction so that he can get the support that he needs.
Okay, well, we will definitely make sure that someone follows up with you today so that we can help assist you and your son so that we can get him all the support that it is that he needs.
So we're going to step back into facilitator roles now. You see, we try to use those stems to help. And sometimes even using those stems or the healthy communication skills helps us in having those conversations. We thought these were some tools that might be beneficial to you all in your day-to-day our activities, but also maybe in the conversations when you're having with one another in your executive session, or just in as with anyone, your family, anyone else. So we're just going to go on there. So now, if you would just consider the coaching prompt. If you'll look at, I'm not going to ask you at this time to say what that might look like in a board meeting, but if we were had more time and it wasn't after, we would have you to practice with one another. But that's a little bit of a challenge since we're doing all of this virtually.
Yeah, we just wanted to use this specific example because this may be an opportunity for you to use those mindful inquiry tools. And I believe we've provided that in the packet for you. So maybe next time when you're intentionally trying to listen to a situation that's occurring and y'all are working on making a decision, you push each other to utilize this resource so that you can really get to the crux of the issue. So what I want to transition to next is talking about the productivity zone. And I really want you to think about that adaptive leadership piece that President Ramos talked about earlier. When we talked about adaptive leadership for racial equity, we all know that change is not easy. Whether it's accepting a new role or affecting a system, levels of improvement for better outcomes for children are challenging. Progress is built about change, and change impels us to get out of our comfort zone. And that's not easy for any of us. In our line of work, where we must venture into potentially uncomfortable areas of service of improving systems, we should look at discomfort as a good thing. And so that's part of our protocol, right? Especially when we're talking about trying to make sure all of our Fort Worth ISD students are being successful. So the most productive space to work is referred the zone of disequilibrium, which is shown on this particular slide. So examine this image and think about where you are when you're having these conversations, these really courageous conversations about race with each other, with people in the community. As you can see, below the threshold of change, nothing major or long-lasting gets accomplished. The atmosphere is too relaxed to address any kind of major issue. The same lack of results occurs above the limited tolerance, right? So when we reach that cap, it's really hard to kind of re-engage into the conversation. That's where it gets too hot to be productive, and our emotions start to get the best of us, right? So that we are into that discomfort eclipse is what we call it. So there is a difference between easy dialogue and fixed technical challenge, and it gets messy. The longer the proposition towards racial equity, the more challenging the conversation becomes. We can never achieve equity without each of us explicitly examining that personal, local, and immediate, and our beliefs and belief systems about our organization and about race. We want this to be a dialogue, an interracial dialogue about race, so that we can begin to develop those racial understandings, and we can truly address our Fort Worth ISD issues. We all have a responsibility, like Dr. Scribner said a little while ago, to disrupt systematic racism. If you don't disrupt, it's a silence and it becomes violence. While knowing that there is no such thing as non-racist, we are either racist or we're anti-racist. So achieving racial equity in education is unapologetic. And it is a top-down process. Let me repeat that again. It is a top-down process. And we all have to have the responsibility to move beyond random acts of equity. And I'm sure you've heard that before. So in order for us to move forward, we have to stay in that productivity zone. Before we move to the next slide, any input, any questions on productivity zone?
I don't have questions. What I'd like to note is that this is where I believe our racial and ethnic equity committee, this is where they live. They live in constant discomfort, constant sense of advocacy and urgency. So when I think about that, I'm thinking about the work that my colleagues on the board are doing along with the community and the school system leaders.
Thank you for that.
And I would just add, and it's with facilitating and just with your comments, Trustee Ramos, I was just thinking, of some of the challenges that we're facing because we're going deep into conversations and trying to hear all perspectives. We're trying to hold and facilitate so that we don't let it get out of that limit of they're over the top where it's gotten. We know it's going to be, to use your word, Dr. Benavides, it's going to be messy. It's going to be tough. And sometimes we're going to disagree. So we have to say, okay, how do we hold that so it is still productive? And that's some of the things that we're facing now. So thank you for bringing that thought into the space.
Appreciate it. All right, we're going to go ahead and move into condition 2 so we can continue our learning. And as Ms. Breed shared earlier, condition 2 is isolating race. This second condition asks you as a participant to isolate race because in our society, people have been conditioned to avoid naming race. This condition helps us keep race at the center of our conversation. When we isolate race, we remove the opportunity to add, I'm sorry, let me back up. When we isolate race, then we remove that opportunity for using code words like first generation, inner city, urban district, poor families. All of these aim to cover up race for particular groups. While this may be uncomfortable for some, I challenge you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And all of us do it, including myself. So it's really about staying as much as you can in condition 2 and isolating race when you're speaking about specific concerns that you have. So I want to push us into practicing. So if you'll go to the next slide, Ms. Inzar. And I want you to read this slide, and then I'm going to ask you to address more recent. Keeping it personal, local, and immediate, I want you to think about your earliest and most recent experience when we talk about race and racism. And I'm going to ask a few of you to share out what that experience was and describe it for us. And remember, keeping it personal, local, and immediate, and isolating race. All right, if I could get 1 or 2 trustees to share out. We're going to practice.
I'll volunteer. Oh, go ahead, Norman.
After you.
Well, that's okay. When I think of my first experience, mine is actually school related. And I grew up in Dallas ISD. And I actually started in a private school when I was in kindergarten, first and second grade. And then in third grade, I moved to our public school because my parents said, you're going to get a better education in the public school. And they were right. In fourth grade, that is the year that DISD started busing. And there was a huge evacuation of students in the school where I went to and they all started going to private schools because they were concerned about the students that were being bused in to our school. And I didn't get it. And I was like, why are you leaving? This made no sense to me. But I realized that it was racially driven. And that's the first, and I don't know fully how I processed it in that moment because I was 9 years old or 8 years old. But I still remember that very well. And I couldn't understand why are people leaving. These are just other kids that are coming in. And
I'm going to stop you, Ms. Starr.
Yes.
Will you isolate race of the people who were leaving?
They were white.
Thank you.
Yes. And the students who were being bused in were mostly either Black or brown children, Hispanic or Black children, or Latinx. So that's my first. That's the first thing I can recollect that of my experience with race.
Thank you so much, Ms. Starr. And I thank you for allowing me to redirect the conversation. I appreciate that.
I appreciate you redirecting.
It's part of practicing our protocol.
Yes, it is.
Mr. Robin, you want to go next?
Yes, and I first experienced race in college, believe it or not. And I went to a private school that was mostly white. There were some African American students who primarily were on the football team. And one individual in particular was a very good athlete. And when we started out as freshmen and juniors and sophomores and juniors, he was pretty much everybody loved him. He was an Uncle Tom kind of guy, and very popular. When he became a senior, he became very radical, and this was during the 60s when there was a lot of stuff going on, and so he transformed into a very angry individual at that time, which was very understandable, really. And I didn't fully understand at that time why he was so angry, but now I certainly do.
Thank you, Mr. Robbins. I'm going to ask for multiple perspectives. So someone who does not identify as white, they will also share their perspective as well.
I don't mind jumping in. I've got a ton of early memories, and I started off in Fort Worth ISD, went to W.J. Turner, Sam Rosen, and Kirkpatrick Elementary. I remember asking myself in second grade, why were everyone in the neighborhood being sent to second grade at Kirkpatrick Elementary? I didn't know the history and the attachment of race to that. I remember having a fight with 2 Black students, and the response from my inner circle and my family of the perception of Black people. My first introduction to anti-Blackness in the Brown community. And I'll even fast forward to the most recent one here has been my Catholic high school that I went to is in the news right now. And it's not news to me. It's part of my trauma on why I fight for this topic. What I lived and what I experienced is completely related to the reasons why I do this, because from the earliest memories to the most recent memories, they're traumatic. And I know what it felt like, and I also know what it was like for me to have protective factors of family, community, church. And I also worked with young people for a couple of decades that didn't have all those protective factors. And I saw the same parallel, that adult convenience will come before children's convenience. And so I watched how systems demonize isolating race, children of color. I watched how they were incarcerated and treated very differently. I watched how they were kicked out of schools or not welcomed back to schools. And I also watched how monies and resources were allocated based on perceptions of capacity and maybe even sometimes intelligence. So to me, this is like all encompassing of the trauma of what I had. And think about that. I was a privileged kid, that my father worked a bunch of extra hours. My mom cut deals with the Catholic diocese in order for me to be able to have those privileges. But I looked around me and not everyone else in my community had those kinds of opportunities.
Thank you so much. And I appreciate all of you being so vulnerable and sharing and speaking your truth. I'd like to take one more response, and then we'll transition to a practice for condition 2. And then we're going to check in on the compass. And if you volunteer to share out, if you could use a more recent experience, because I'd like to hear one more recent experience with race.
Yeah, so from the recent experience aspect has been these conversations that I've been having, particularly even just today, surrounding the trial of Derek Chauvin in Minnesota. I absolutely am rifling through, trying to take inventory of my own skepticism that I don't believe that anything is going to happen to that individual, even though I personally feel like he blatantly murdered someone in public. I don't really feel like there's any way around it. And yet I feel like that justice will not be served in that situation. And so, so those are difficult conversations to continue to have. It's not even about advocating for anyone to be punished in any particular way, but it just, but I truly just feel from my personal experience, from history repeating itself and telling me that the life of a Black man does not matter enough to be able to get justice in this nation. And so status quo will prevail yet again.
Thank you so much, Trustee Phillips. So I'm going to transition us and we're going to watch one more video. And when you watch this video, I want you to think about isolating race. What did you notice in the video? And who did the video revolve around? And we're going to come back and we're going to practice. All right. Thank you, Ms. Nzar. Thank you, Ms. Nzar. So I asked you to think about two questions. What did you notice in the video? And who did the video revolve around? Now think about your personal, local, and immediate, and where have you observed some of these same types of behaviors in our community? And I'll have a couple of you share out.
I think that it evolves around the fear of when a lot of people see Black males. That's the pre-reconsumption of he's violent, he's dangerous. And then they saw on the end that this is the person that you're coming to see. And then as a personal aspect, when I first got into politics, being young, Black, and female, whenever I would go into a mayoral event, the first thing they thought that I was either an aide or the help. So I recognized that look and recognize that conversation. Who are you here for? Not welcome to the event. It was always, who are you here to represent? Who are you here for?
Thank you, Ms. Perkins. I appreciate that. Can I get another volunteer to share out?
I go. Perception. They see you outside and they judge you by the way you look, but they don't see anything else. They only see you, but they don't see what can you bring to the table. So yeah, it has happened to me.
I was just going to say, Mr. Loveno, so isolating race as a Latino,
Yes.
they don't see you in a
No.
specific role. Can you allude to what you were referring to?
I'm trying to think of one example. I went to the store to Costco a couple of days ago, and I encountered a big, tall guy who pushed me over out of the nowhere. And I asked, excuse me, I said, what do you want? And like, well, you kind of pushed me over. What are you going to do about it? Do you speak English? So the perception, here comes this Latino guy. He will not have an idea of how to defend himself or how to speak to this tall guy. That perception in them still exists.
Yes. Thank you so much. I appreciate you practicing with me.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of rhetorical questions. You don't need to answer them. I just want you to think about them. Considering all the different affiliations that all of you are involved in, your workplace, religion, social clubs, recreational places that you go to, what is the racial composition of those affiliations? If racial diversity exists, are tensions present due to race or differences? If little racial diversity exists, have you asked yourself why? And so in closing with this condition right here, think about what does that look like in Fort Worth ISD? And I'll turn it over back to you, Mrs. Reed.
All right. Thank you so much for being so authentic and being vulnerable and having those conversations and putting all that out into the space for us to just really reflect on. So I wanted just check in with you as a board. I know it's probably been a long evening. Are you good? Because we had hoped to get through condition 4. We've gone through conditions 1 and 2. Would you all like to continue? I see yes. Okay, we'll keep going then. All right.
Checking in on the compass. We've gone pretty deep already. You can just drop it in the chat. Are you in thinking, believing, acting, or feeling? And I'll just share out what everybody's dropping in the chat. I've got thinking from President Ramos. Feeling from Ms. Dar, thank you. Thinking from Mr. Phillips. Well, I appreciate you sharing out because we're getting ready to go into examining our own implicit biases. So Ms. Inzar, if you'll pop that back up. Thank you from Mr. Robbins in action, Ms. Paz in thinking and feeling, and Dr. Scribner in feeling and thinking. I appreciate that. What I really want you to think about when we talk about implicit biases, number one, we all have them. So an implicit bias exists when people unconsciously hold attitudes towards others or associate stereotypes with them. And I want you to know we all have them. So I'm going to show you this quick video about implicit biases, and then we're going to engage in some conversation, keeping in mind condition 1 and 2, okay? Go ahead, Ms. Sinzar.
Bias. Implicit bias. Implicit bias. 2016 was the year that implicit bias went somewhat mainstream.
Yeah, so when Hillary Clinton mentioned implicit bias in the debates, our phones started blowing up, all our friends started emailing us about it.
But what is implicit bias? Implicit biases are basically thought processes that happen without you even knowing it. Little mental shortcuts that hold judgments you might not agree with. And sometimes those shortcuts are based on race. First, some clarity. Saying someone has an implicit bias is different from calling someone a racist.
The word racist is a highly loaded term, right, here in American society. A lot of times when people are using it, they're thinking of the kind of old-fashioned Ku Klux Klan style race.
But implicit bias isn't anywhere near that, explicit.
Implicit bias is something that comes out of ordinary mental functioning, out of how the mind normally works.
We've all grown up in a culture with media images, news images, conversations we heard at home, our education. Think of that as a fog we've been breathing our whole life. We'd never even realized it, what we were taking in.
And that fog causes associations that lead to bias.
I somehow know that if you say peanut butter, I'm going to say jelly. That's an association that's been ingrained in me because throughout my life, peanut butter and jelly are together. And in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men and violent crime being.
And because of that, I actually deep down inside have been taught that Black men are violent, aggressive, and not to be trusted, criminals.
With all those associations, I'm not trying to let us off the hook. In some ways, none of us stood a chance.
Starting today, we'll post a video a day dealing with one challenge of understanding implicit bias and its relationship to race and exploring ways we might combat the problem. One more thing, if you're seeing this and thinking that it doesn't apply to you, well, you might be falling prey to the blind spot bias. That's the scientific name for a mental bias that allows you to see biases in others, but not in yourself. We're biased.
So in a minute, we're going to watch another video that talks about a specific racial group and the types of biases that they endure as a race. But what I want you to think about is, how are you engaging with people that you work with? And how are you learning about them and their different diversities, their culture? Are you getting to know your colleagues? Are you getting to know the community, the students that you support? What are their backgrounds? And are you intentionally suspending negative judgments about them? And are you engaging in courageous conversations to increase your knowledge and address those negative perceptions, stereotypes, and attitudes? Remember, we want you to use the protocol and teach your colleagues when they don't know how to use the protocol so that you can engage and begin to sustain the conversation. So if you'll go to the next video, Lisa, and we're going to do some practice with implicit bias.
You turn on the captioning, please.
I'm Apache, but really that's the government's name. I'm Apache, but really that's the government's name because they can't say this the guy in there.
They will tell me how awesome they think it is that I've decided to be a part of my culture. And it's funny to me, it like hits me really weird and I don't like it. And I didn't know why at first, but it's because I haven't decided to be a part of my culture. I live it every day.
I'm more comfortable with the term Native, divorced from Native American. I know there are people who use Indigenous. If there is one term I do not like to be called is American Indian.
And for me, to be Indigenous is to have an intimate and interconnected relationship to a homeland.
And so that's really important because land is, tied to every aspect of who we are.
Being Native in a city is almost a daily reminder of your people's erasure, of the fact that people don't even remember that you're here and that you exist.
But what I did encounter was just this preconceived notion that all Native Americans are dead.
I've had older white men come up to me and say, oh man, if this was 40 years ago, I can just do whatever I wanted to.
The cattle outside doing the work and the dog inside the house, those are property. Those are the Black folks in America. They're our property to white men. then the exotic antelope on the wall, or the exotic, that's the native, that's how natives are perceived in America.
We're treated like animals. They monitor our blood quantum. We're the only, besides dogs and horses, I don't know of any other animal that they monitor the blood quantum.
The way I explain it to people is like, imagine a pizza with different slices, and let's say 32 slices. Of the 32 slices, I'm 28 Apache. That's my particular blood quantum. And Native Americans in the US are the only minority group who have to prove their nativeness on an Indian card.
It's used to divide Native people against each other, because it can be used as a way to say, I am more Native than you. And I was a part of that too. I used my 4/4 to kind of make myself feel better against other people.
The one drop rule, meaning that, one drop of Black blood makes you Black. That was to keep as many people oppressed or, legitimize their oppression as possible. But on the other side, one drop of anything else completely dilutes you as a Native person. So if you're a Native person, you have a one drop of something else, then suddenly you're less Native. So it's the opposite.
Traditionally, within the Apache society, you go by the mother. And if the mother's recognized as Apache, she has her clan, the children are unquestionably Apache. Not in the American context, not when patriarchy trumps matriarchy. So what does that mean? My sisters are short 1/16 of a degree. What does that mean? Does that mean their pinkies aren't Apache? What does that mean?
Being a mixed race person is a whole another side of it, but that's a very common experience in our tribe. So it's not as if we're unusual in that way. What is unusual is the admixture of Black.
My grandfather actually doesn't want people, if he hears that somebody from the tribe is coming over, he won't come out of his room because he doesn't want them to know that he's that complexion that he doesn't want me to be affiliated with having African American blood. But I say it. It's not going to change anything.
If it were up to the American government, Native wouldn't be around, because after a certain time, that blood will dilute. It will go out. And so if there's no Native peoples to provide benefits, then we're not obligated to meet these treaty rights. And if we're not obligated to meet these treaty contracts, then the land is available. The resources are available.
And I think that essential point about our claim to sovereignty, our claim to land, our claim to culture, our claim to resources is one that gets lost. We don't insist upon the fact that we are a nation.
And we have taken huge steps to decolonize. And that proof comes from people being able to have the opportunities to speak their language, to be on their ancestral land.
The thing with decolonization is that it's an ongoing process, just like grieving, just like any loss.
As much as possible now, I try to tell people that I have a Native American name, and maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to me. My name maybe doesn't have a romanticized Hollywood Indian name, but my name has more meaning than that. My name means that my family survived. My family survived disease. My family survived Catholicism. My family survived settler colonialism, and my family, they survived. I survived. My existence is resistance. Me saying my name is Skiam Tolk, that is resistance in and of itself.
Thank you, Ms. Inzar. If you'll go to the next slide, and what I want you to think about, first of all, you know the definition of implicit bias. So were there any surprises to you? Did you have some of those stereotypes that you thought about? How are you challenging your own biases? And so I want us to really look at the questions that are here, and if I'll get one board member to answer each one of these questions. So that first question is, what racial beliefs do I carry with me each day in both personal and professional settings? I could get one board member to answer that question.
I'll get it started. Mine is, my belief is that I don't believe that skin color should be predictive. It shouldn't be pervasive, and it shouldn't be predictive, and especially in the school setting. So personal and professional, I don't believe that skin color should be predictive.
Thank you. And thank you for speaking for your eye. The next question is, how do those racial beliefs show up in my day-to-day interactions with your constituents? So if I could get another board member to answer that question.
Yeah, so they show, oh, okay.
I was going to correct the sentence. It should say my, but it says your constituents. Go ahead. Sorry, Mr.
Oh, sure. No problem. Yeah, so my racial belief shows up in day-to-day interactions with my constituents, because we are so heavily segregated in the city of Fort Worth. The majority of my constituents are Black, from Black neighborhood, Black side of town. And the expectation in my neighborhood, which I welcome, is that I'm going to go in there and represent for my people, right? That I'm going to take our story, I'm going to take our plight, take our pain, and take our fight for equity into the boardroom and make sure that our voice is advocated for. Now, always trying to juxtapose that with making sure that the all is encompassed within that, right? That I'm not just in there strictly for District 3, but I am charged to be able to help govern an entire school district for the several thousands of students that we are privileged enough to be able to serve. But making sure that the Black voice is uplifted in there as well, because they chose me to be a representative that was going to do that. So it shows up for me every day in those interactions with my students.
Thank you. The next question is, what is my hesitation with talking about race and how it impacts student achievement? If I could get a different board member to share out their response to that. And remember, we're practicing keeping it personal, local, immediate, and identifying race or isolating race. Go ahead, Ms. Paz.
Yeah, so I mean, one, I have very little hesitation talking about race and how it impacts student achievement. But at the times where I do have hesitation, it's usually in situations where, you know, there's someone who is pushing back. And
who's someone?
I'm sorry, when there are white people who are pushing back on the conversation that I'm attempting to have. And I mentioned this earlier in the comments with one of the questions that I often hear people say, all children deserve this thing, all children, all children, all children. And I think that when I hear different racial groups talk about all children, I very rarely hear actually all children. I hear my children. You know, when a white person says all children deserve this, it's hard for me to hear them say that, to truly believe that they're talking about all children, that they are somehow asserting that because we are talking about race and racial equity and the impact that it has on student achievement, that we are somehow taking away something from white children, and that's not the case. And so that's the hesitation that I have, is I'm afraid of bringing damage to this work and the progress that we have made by making people feel alienated. And that's where I have to, you know, check myself and keep in mind that this is uncomfortable, and that I have to lean into that discomfort.
Thank you, Ms. Paz. And I appreciate you adjusting and speaking from I. The last question is, how does the data that we've reviewed today confirm or dispute my own racial beliefs? If I could get one more board member to share out. And I'm talking about the data that Mrs. Breed shared a little while ago. So how does the data that we reviewed today confirm or dispute my own racial beliefs? Did you want to go, Ms. Jackson?
I can go.
Okay.
I believe the data confirms my own racial beliefs, and that is unfortunate.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I really appreciate you all staying in as protocol as much as possible and making the adjustments when you identify that you need to make that adjustment. I'm going to pass it over to Mrs. Breed, and she's going to share with us a little bit about how we create stories. So go ahead, Ms. Breed.
Thank you. You know, when we're having conversations about anything, but in particular when we're having conversations about race, it is really important that we have all the perspectives heard. And you know, that's really difficult for us when we are with peers and friends, and to be the one to always have to stop and say, well, you know, wait a minute. How do you know that? Do we have that perspective at the table with us? Who is representing that particular group of individuals? So the next video that we're going to watch is the danger of a single story. Now, as you're watching this TED Talk, I want you to keep in mind, I want you to think about what single story are you individually, what are you holding on to? It may be about the students, maybe it's about the staff, or maybe it's about yourself. And then we're going to just unpack it a little bit more after you've seen the video.
I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up in a university. I'm a storyteller, and I would like to tell you a few personal stories about what I like to call the danger of the single story. I grew up on a university campus in Eastern Nigeria. My mother says that I started reading at the age of 2, although I think 4 is probably close to the truth. So I was an early reader, and what I read were British and American children's books. I was also an early writer. And when I began to write at about the age of 7, stories in pencil with crayon illustrations that my poor mother was obligated to read, I wrote exactly the kinds of stories I was reading. All my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples. And they talked a lot about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Now, this despite the fact that I lived in Nigeria, I had never been outside Nigeria. We didn't have snow. We ate mangoes. And we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. My characters also drank a lot of ginger beer because the characters in the British books I read drank ginger beer. Never mind that I had no idea what ginger beer was. And for many years afterwards, I would have a desperate desire to taste ginger beer. But that is another story. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination. They opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this. It saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and our old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US,
I think we can stop the video there.
Never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia.
I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to look at that video. It did go out with the homework, and it is a relatively long video. So if you didn't have a chance to look at it, I encourage you to see the video in its entirety. But what I want you to do is just let's take some time, if you would, to just say, as you watch this TED Talk, and you thought about the danger of a single story, what might come to your mind? What came to your mind as you were thinking about what have you held on to as a single story that you say, well, I really need to process that? Let me give you some time to just think about that question before we dive right in. Remind you to use protocol, speaking from I, and isolate race if you're thinking of a single story that you'd like to share.
I feel like I need to make a comment about one of the stories that was told tonight. And I don't think it was told to be mean or to be, I don't even know how to say it, but the story that Norm told earlier about the athlete that was a really nice guy and got along with everybody. And I was with him with that story because that was me in college, the athlete that got along with everybody. But when you said that he was like an Uncle Tom, for me, and I'm not speaking for everybody else, but when I heard that to me carries negative undertones. And if I'm a child watching this tonight and they heard that, the first thing they would do was say to their parents, so does that mean that's me? Or what did you mean by that? And I don't think you meant it to be mean. But since we're using this evening to learn and to be educated, I'm just saying that using that word, Uncle Tom, is not anything positive for us or for me. It doesn't have a positive meaning for me and my family. And it's just something that we can learn from tonight and move on.
I appreciate that, Daphne, and I understand that. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brookins, for bringing that up and speaking your truth. And Mr. Robbins, thank you for accepting that in the spirit in which she offered that. Others that might want to share something, a single story that you might have been you held on to for years, or maybe it's just recently that you want to share.
I can share a whole bunch. I mean, I think about my own racial development, identity development, of when I look down on my own community and my own people. When I felt that I was socialized and everything around me taught me that to be of Mexican descent was to be dirty, was to not be pure, to not be intelligent. I can think about when I hit the mid-range of the racial identity and I began to really not like white people in general, questioning, why am I not taught who I am, where I come from? How is that not relevant? I can think as I got further along in that racial identity development that I began to get into this eclectic mindset of, it's not just white people, it's also people of color who are unconscious. And those levels of consciousness that, then having to come to reckoning with, I was blaming white people for such a big part of my life. And then to see people of color in positions of power and influence and not do anything like that was devastating. And so then I get further along the development and having to go back to what you just showed us with those assumptions. Do I really believe that people show up with the best intentions and the purest of heart? And how do I distinguish that from the actions of not disrupting systems? I think about James Baldwin, and a friend of mine had me listen to a podcast. James Baldwin was pitted against this, and I know we're not at Condition 6 yet, but James Baldwin in essence said, he was asked, are you with the Black Panther parties or are you with Dr. Martin Luther King? And he in essence was being proposed with a bribe, and the bribe of, will you take the benefits of a dominant society and turn your back on your people? And what that means for me and how I have internalized that, how I have worked to get over that. I've got a whole bunch of single stories that I've told myself, because in some cases, it's what allows me to sleep good at night. And in some cases, it's what's keeping me up late at night. So just kind of wanted to get that going, because I can go for days on how many times I regret having taken the bribe for my own personal gain, my own personal agenda that I may have had. And just in retrospect, I did kids wrong. I did young people in my community wrong. And those are things that I'm willing to learn and grow from, and the reason why I show up in the way that I do.
Thank you for being so authentic and sharing that. And if we can just get one more, kind of think about that single story. Or maybe you want to share something that came up that you thought about while you were listening to her single story and her own reflections of how she's grown up and what her experiences were.
I'll share. So I've talked a lot in our racial equity committee meetings, and not so much on our public board meetings, but in my capacity as a board member, just about my upbringing and, you know, the fact that I grew up in a small town in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. I didn't have people of color around me. You know, what I knew of Black people were, you know, Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson and Martin Luther King and, you know, people who I saw on television and through the media. And, you know, those were all, I had very positive, you know, the single story that I had was that essentially, you know, that we were in a post-racial society because there were no people of color around me to, for me to see anything other than that. Now that I'm older, I understand that the reason that there were no people of color around me in the first place was because of racism, and that the town that I grew up in was a sundown town. And you know, just understanding the historical context, and it was a lot for me to kind of grapple with. And you know, that as I, you know, got older and was a teenager, and then moved away, and you know, had more interactions with Black people and then Latino people later on, after I moved around some more. You know, it was that single story, I think, that has led me to do a lot of the work that I have done, just because I think I was so betrayed by that early on in life. So, and then I'm just constantly having to like recheck myself and challenge those biases, and understanding that even, you know, with, you know, 7 years now of work in race and racial equity in education, and, you know, work in community organizing before that, it's still, you know, it's an ongoing process. And that's what when we talk about expecting and accepting non-closure, the work is never over.
Right.
And I think I keep having to check myself, like, okay, when am I going to get there? There is not a real place.
Right. Thank you for sharing, Ms. Paz. And you're right. We're always still growing. All of us are still growing. And some people say, well, you've been doing this work. And I say, I haven't arrived. I've got lots of work that I'm working on myself. And as I try to still connect with others and learn. So no, you're right. We never arrive. Anyone? I thought I saw someone else's hand. Well, if not, we're just going to go a little deeper. Next slide. This particular video is a perfect segue to condition 3. Let's enter the next slide, please. Condition 3, normalizing social construction and multiple perspectives. We talked a little bit about that. Now, you know, not just when you're having conversations about race, but we have to be intentional, especially when we are having conversations about race, that all perspectives are being held, because otherwise we're going to be acting in disconsciousness. And that's when you say, I don't know, but I think I do. And if you recall, if you've done any of this work, that is the most dangerous, when someone that thinks they know something and then they're acting they don't know indeed. So they're speaking from what we say sleep. If you have, that's when we say you don't know. And you're taking for the truth to be something that somebody told you or something you've heard, and it may not be the truth. So it's always said, be sure you have multiple perspectives. We're going to, again, take the opportunity to look at another video that helps us, and then we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about this particular video and where you find yourself on the conference.
Going over racist incident caught on camera. A father targeting another dad during a school meeting, others in the room coming to his defense. And now we're hearing from that father who was attacked. TJ Holmes is here with the story. Good morning, TJ.
Okay, a lot of people who see this video are going to be shocked straight by what they see. Others are going to shrug their shoulders and say it's emblematic of problems in this country. What we're about to see is a school meeting about racism. And before parents could even make their point, another parent proved their point by telling an immigrant, you don't like it here? And why did you leave Mexico? A meeting about racism in a Michigan school erupts when Adrian Iriola, who immigrated from Mexico in the 1980s, was interrupted as he described his son's experience.
I went to his bedroom to say goodnight, and he was crying because of the abuse that he was enduring in this school system.
And why did you stay in Mexico?
That's indicative of what these kids are experiencing. That's indicative of what our kids are experiencing. Comments like that. And that's he's sharing a story right now. And that's indicative of what our kids are experiencing.
Parents in shock. They turn their ire to the parent who asked the question as Iriola tries to hand the mic over and let the man speak. The meeting was to address racial issues in the school district after a group of Black football players was targeted with racial slurs on Snapchat. One of those football players' fathers was the first to come to Iriola's defense.
I had a natural reaction, which was to stand up and confront him. But by and large, everybody was supportive. There was lots of tears, lots of remorse, and I think it was an awakening for those people that were unaware that racism existed.
The offending parent eventually takes the mic to make this point.
Try being white and walk in a Black neighborhood, see what happens. And like this incident where somebody made a little tweet, and nobody was hurt in that. No, nobody got hurt in that. It was done off campus.
After the meeting, Iriola told us the incident felt like an old wound being reopened.
Not just for me, but for my children.
Iriola kept his composure and eventually answered the man's question, which resulted in another outburst.
Here's my question: why didn't I stay in Mexico? Because this is the greatest country in the world. But you're complaining about being here. You have the right to be here. You're complaining about being here. It's not your turn. It's not about.
Yeah, and look, the school district did put out a statement and says in part that this type of bigotry goes against all the values and beliefs of our school system. It says we will continue to listen to parents and students. Now, the man who spoke up in there and made that comment, his son actually put out a post on Facebook distancing himself from his dad. And you're seeing it up there in which he actually says his views of hate in no way represent my own. That is the man's son that put that out. This is an overwhelmingly white district. The kids have been complaining about this for quite some time. And the complaint now was confirmed. They're saying this is the type of stuff we are subjected to often. And so it happened on camera. Maybe we all can take a moment and take it in. I don't think any of us are surprised that somebody in the country maybe has that attitude, but a lot of people are shocked that he was so cool and comfortable and open about doing it.
But you're encouraged by the reaction from others in there.
Entire room.
The woman that was in front, how she turned around immediately, and so that is encouraging to have that. But you like you said that some people are like shocked by this, others are like, what's the problem?
Yep. Seen it, been there, done that, and I'm just glad other people are seeing it. That's the attitude of some. I'm glad, what I've been talking about is just on display. You saw it, that's what I've been talking about. We'll see what happens in that district, if this helps them move forward in some way. But it's just an ugly incident caught on camera, but still, we can all learn something from what we just saw.
One of the worst things could probably be having your child distance themselves from you, in your view. That probably hurts more than anything else.
Thank you, TJ. Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thank you.
Okay, there's a lot there. So whose point of view or whose perspective was highlighted during that interaction? And then we're just going to do a quick check-in on the compass. What came up? What are you thinking about as you watch that interaction?
So I'm trying to be conscious of not dominating the conversation. But so I'll start this. I'm definitely in like the feeling zone, thinking and feeling, going back and forth, maybe going around the outside of the compass, but definitely not centered. So I think that this video highlighted the perspective of the white man who said, why are you here? Or why didn't you stay in Mexico? And they were highlighting it from we can't believe that he said that. But having been been in this seat for almost 8 years now, we hear that a lot. And even in our own community, and it's been an issue lately. It wasn't surprising. It was shocking, but not surprising. And I'm really glad that I was glad to see that other parents kind of stuck up for him, and that there were other white people there that turned around and were like, "What did you just say?"
Right.
That does show some progress, but still, I don't know. My people, we need to do better.
And I've seen that clip many times, and I don't care. As many times as I see it, it takes me right to my feelings. And then, I think about the courage that you have to speak up and say something, because I'm thinking about from my personal, local, and immediate, just not too long ago. I mean, like a few weeks ago, with some individuals that I would say, well, they were friends. We'll see. Maybe I'll see. I don't know. We're still friends, but they were having some conversations about some things. And I thought, you're sitting there and this is supposed to be kind of a social kind of just, we're just kind of talking. And you think, wait a minute, I'm not letting that go. I'm going to have to stand up and say something. And I said, and talking about, it was a mixed group, whites, blacks, Latinos, Latinas, I should say. And then I thought, wait just a second. We just went into some anti-blackness here. And I stopped that conversation, and just the courage. So I just want us to think about that. Do we have the fortitude, if you will? We have to be bold and unapologetic when we're having these conversations, and stand up and speak our truth, and shut down some conversations or comments, or when they're in that single story, and make some corrections there. Anyone else that wants to share?
Yeah, I had a meeting where it was a neighborhood association meeting, and it was predominantly white, and we were moving some students into their neighborhood, and a man stood up and said that he did not want these kids in his neighborhood because his taxes were going to be raised, because they were going to have to hire all of these special ed teachers for these kids. And it was about 100+ people in the room. And I went up to the mic and I told him that I work with these kids, and I knew that most of the kids that were coming to his neighborhood were B and C students. Now, these students lived in the projects. They didn't know when their parents were coming home, didn't hardly eat. They were going through a lot. And if they were B and C students,
be sure to isolate race about the students that you are referring to.
Students or African American and Hispanic. And if they were B and C students going through all of this stuff, what kind of students would they be if they weren't going through all those barriers? And that's what I told him. I said, can you imagine if they were eating every day, if they were clothed every day, if they weren't babysitting their brothers and sisters? They would be straight A students probably. So you wouldn't have to worry about paying extra taxes to pay for special ed students if these kids came to your neighborhood.
Thank you for speaking your truth and sharing that.
Ms. Breed, you brought up the word fortitude, and I think that's really critical, and I think it's something that that has to be built, and to feel empowered to say something. And I will be the first to admit that in some situations I do feel empowered and I am able to speak up, and then in others I'm not as able to do that. And I will say that over the last 2 years, almost 2 years since I've served on this board and served on the Racial Equity Committee, every time I learned something new, and I feel like I'm more aware. I hope I'm listening, and I hope I'm learning, and I hope that I'm gathering tools in my toolbox to better represent those who are marginalized in any situation. But I do feel like it's a constant process of building that fortitude. And that's part of that journey, and part of me saying, I'm not there yet. I want to be better, and I will continue to work to get there, even though, as Ashley says, there is no there. There isn't a final destination, or, oh, I've mastered this. No, we're not. It's not, you're a novice and then a professional and then a master or whatever. It's a constant process to build that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Does anybody want to just check in on the compass and just share where you might find yourself, and then we'll continue on? Just a couple of people, where you find yourself on the compass. And
Sherry, if I could, I know frustrated is not one of the quadrants, but I watched that video and disappointed that it is the people of color, the Black male who stands up and defends, that it is the Hispanic male who is given the burden to explain and justify his life's decision. And I think it's a great opportunity, to Ann's point, for you did see that the woman in front kind of shake her head, but I would have been much more encouraged, and this is why we're trying to educate each other. If those who are part of the dominant culture have the tools, have the courage, have the desire to articulate it, because I think when folks of privilege are speaking their truth in this kind of fairness and justice perspective, that's when real change happens.
Exactly. Thank you so much for saying that, Dr. Scrivener. I can't, that's what we say. Sometimes for me as a Black woman, I have to, I'll think, I know I'm going to say it, and I have to think about now, how's this going to come across when you say it? Or if you are just something, I won't go into that story, but something just happened the other day at the grocery store. And I thought, now, if you say something, how that's going to come across. You're going to come across as that angry Black woman, but you're really just standing up for yourself or advocating for yourself. So really, I'll always say some of my white friends, I say, I need you to use your white privilege to say or to do or whatever it is, because what's going to come totally different if it's coming from me as a Black woman, and the others can say it and it will be accepted a little differently, or maybe it'll be accepted just in general. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, I think we're going to go on, Dr. Benavides.
All right, so Ms. Inzar, if you'll show me condition 4. So we're going to go into the last agreement, the last condition for the evening. And this one is actually about monitoring the agreements and the conditions. And so in our conversation today, we really have to try to stay engaged, speaking our truth, experiencing discomfort either from the videos or from the comments or the pushback from each other, all in that loving care and in the spirit of growth, right? And building that racial consciousness. So conditions 1 and 2 help us engage in the conversation. It gives us that structure. Conditions 3 and 4 help us sustain the conversation. And remember when we talked about that productivity zone, we want to stay as much as possible in that productivity zone. So the purpose is to work towards the center of that compass, like we talked about at the very beginning. And I know that some of you have shared that you're either feeling, thinking, believing, acting. What we would like for you to do is eventually start to really listen to those multiple perspectives, use that mindful inquiry tool so that you can start to really sustain the conversation, understand the lived experiences to develop that racial consciousness. So we monitor the conversation about race by using all of these protocols and parameters. And we adjust our conversation to hold a group in that productivity zone. So we're going to do one last practice, and then we're going to come back. So Ms. Inzar, will you show the next video? And on the front of this video, the question is, how, let's just pretend these people in the video are practicing protocol. How are the speakers engaging in the agreements? So this is a pretend scenario, okay?
And Eric Holder have said statements that have given them that impression. Are you saying no, it is not a major problem in this country. No, it is not. My father was a janitor. He was born in the Jim Crow South. Fast forward, my father in his late 40s started a small business, got a little bit of property. This is what happens in America. Raised 3 boys, educated them. We have a thriving black middle class. If black America were a country, Brooke, it would be the 15th wealthiest country in the world. For crying out loud, this is not your grandfather's America. We ought not act like it is.
Yeah, but like, I don't, for 2 things. One, I think your earpiece could be broken because the question was on mental health, and you once again go back to the pathologies of the black community. That's stunning to me. But
why do you have to insult me all the time? Why can't you address what I said rather than insulting me? Why is that necessary? Can we have a discussion as 2 black men without insulting each other? Is that possible? Can we try and do that, please?
Larry, I haven't insulted you. Larry, I'm not insulting you. What I'm responding to
you have. You said I was sounding a dog whistle. Why do Republicans always use a dog whistle?
I didn't say.
Why don't you deal with what I said? The merits of what I said. For a change, Lamont, I watch you all the time. You talk over people. You don't listen to the merits of what they say.
You're talking over me. Like, first of all, okay, a few things. I never said dog whistle. Second, you're saying engage what you talked about.
You did.
I just talked. Let me finish. I didn't. When you rewind this, you'll realize you were wrong. What I just spoke about was mental health in the black community. What I just spoke about was mental health in the black community, and you responded by talking about black people and believing that racism still exists. You totally didn't acknowledge my question or respond to my comment. So let's not.
I want us to have perspective and talk about what's important, but you won't do that.
Oh no! Well, you don't get to decide what's important. You don't. We all have opinions here. I made a comment. I wanted you to respond to it, but I'll respond to your comment.
You think the problem of unarmed black people is a major problem in America, and I don't.
Okay, so well, let me tell you what I think now that you've spoken. There are 2 issues here. You mentioned black on black crime. You say that that's a problem. I agree with you that it's a problem.
It's a huge problem. A massive problem.
Larry, I agree with you.
One voice, gentlemen. One voice. Mark.
I agree with Larry Elder that black and black violence is.
Listen, sir, you can stop it here.
I absolutely agree with him. So let's not argue about what we both agree on. I agree.
So, keeping in mind what you heard in that conversation, thinking about conditions 1, 2, 3, and 4, and right now we're really looking at condition 4, how we monitor the agreements and conditions and how we establish those parameters. Just share out. What did you see? What were the responses had they actually been using protocol?
I'm not sure the parameters existed.
Right. What else?
So the one gentleman that kept interrupting, he was not keeping things local, immediate, and personal. He was trying to assert that his experience, his lived experience, which is a valid experience, but he was asserting that that is like the
only experience.
Yes.
Anybody else? Did they use mindful inquiry? I'm just curious.
No mindful inquiry.
Yeah, I think they could have probably used a little bit of practice with mindful inquiry tool. So Ms. Ensar, if you'll bring up the next slide. First of all, I've really enjoyed spending time with everyone here today. And, as practitioners, we continue to want to develop our own racial consciousness and our development in how we are sharing and teaching others. And so I'd just like to hear from you, from the group. How was this experience for you? How well did you model protocol? And how did you respond to differing perspectives? I'll give you a couple of seconds to process that, and I'd love for you to share out. And if I could get 4 voices in this space today, and I would like to hear multiple perspectives. So if you've paid attention to who's responding to the questions tonight, I'd like to hear 4 responses, and I'd like for you to use multiple perspectives. All right. Whoever wants to go first, and they can pick whatever question they want to address. I know we're getting tired, but I will use my teacher wait time. Go ahead, Dr. Scribner. I saw you.
Yeah, so I would say the experience that I have is the challenge and the discipline of withholding judgment. The implicit bias is there in all of us, and the ability to deliberately withhold judgment and not, I'm reflecting on the video with the Native young people, and it was just really an eye opener for me. I did not know many of those things, and it was powerful, and it reminded me the importance of withholding.
I need 3 more responses. Mostly because I really want to. Go ahead, Ms. Paz.
Oh,
I
I
put
was gonna say,
questions in the chat.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Mhm.
So for me, this experience was I think this was a very valuable experience. This is the first time that we as a group have had this conversation and this training together as a whole. And I'm sad that CJ's not here, because I really value her perspective as well. I know she's here, but not able to provide feedback. But I think that this was a very valuable experience for us to just kind of connect over, and to and also for me, even though I've been through like our Beyond Diversity training a couple of times, and this still has, I've learned things, and I always learn new things whenever I'm engaging in these conversations, and also learning things about some of my colleagues that I've known for a really long time. So.
Go ahead.
I will be percolating on this for quite a while to come. And that's a good thing, because we accept and expect non-closure. And if I were able to just turn this off, then perhaps I wasn't engaging to the extent that I should have been. And so I know that I will be ruminating on this for many days to come, and I appreciate that challenge, and that that's an opportunity.
And I challenge you, Ms. Dar, and really all the trustees and Dr. Scribner, to think about how do we embed this work in everything that we do. We're practicing in isolation tonight because you're being exposed to the protocol and what it is like to have the courageous conversation about race. But I challenge you to embed it in all the work that we do, from your personal to your professional life, because that is when we're going to start to see others come into the conversation as well. If I could have one more response, and then we're going to close for tonight. Lisa, will you bring up that last slide after we have our last panelist share out?
Yeah, so I would say, how the experience was for me. It's an experience that I'm glad that we had tonight. I really want us to be, at the forefront of race equity. And, in my personal experience, I don't know how many boards are having these types of conversations, and really pushing forward with having these discussions with one another. So it's good for me from that part of the experience. It has me in the thinking quadrant heavily at the moment, and really in the thinking quadrant about what does this mean to my white colleagues, right? How much of this will be internalized for us to really be able to be radical in our approach when it comes to defeating systemic racism? It's not a lot that we can do in in the police department. There's not a lot we can do in a municipality or in other areas. But there's so much that we can do when it comes to the school system, particularly in Fort Worth. That's where we actually do have authority and power. So how are we going to exercise that? How are we truly going to move forward, understanding that we are in a district that is 89% students of color, and how are we going to tailor that education around them, right? How are we going to look at the data that we're seeing? And when we look at the data that we're seeing, understanding that Black and brown kids are at the bottom all the time of these data sets, what are we going to be willing to do to make that non-existent, right? So I welcome the conversation. I'm glad we're having it. I do feel like we're moving in a proper direction. But so much of it is going to take all of us. And it absolutely is going to take my white colleagues to be able to utilize their position and their platform for us to be able to really be radical in our approach to saying that we're going to educate and close those achievement gaps for Black and brown kids. So it leaves me thinking that.
Thank you, Trustee Phillips. Ms. Jackson? I see your hand is raised. Oh.
It is. I'm using my daughter's computer, so, change computers, have to think. President Ramos' phone or computer has lost capacitance and it won't work, so he's asked me to close out the meeting. So I'd like to go through and see if there are any comments, and I'll just call out through if I can, and I won't go in I guess I can go in specific order. Trustee Phillips, your comments were very powerful. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share?
No, ma'am. Thank you so much, Vice President Jackson. I'm good.
Thank you. Trustee Brookins.
No more comments at this time. I guess I can make a comment. I think this is a start of something good, and I don't want to see the momentum end. Looking at that data was very eye-opening to me, and it's been going on for this long. Why? What can we do to fix it? So I don't want this momentum to stop, and maybe we should look at setting some goals and some timelines to really get some stuff done, because once we put some legs to it, then something will happen instead of just talking about it.
Thank you. Trustee Evans is in here only mode and cannot speak, so I'm going to move on to Trustee Dar, if I could, District 6.
No comments, but just a thank you to Ms. Breed and Dr. Benavides for spending the evening with us this evening. Thank you for your leadership and for guiding us through that process.
Great. Going to move on. Thank you, Trustee Dar. Trustee Norman Robbins, any comment?
Yes, some of you have heard me say this many times. I feel this is the missing link in the success of our children, and we are starting to address it as we should have years and years ago. We're starting to use race to apply resources where they're needed the most, and that's what's making a difference in student achievement. And again, I'm anxious for us to move as rapidly as we can in this area. So I look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Robbins. Trustee Luedmanos.
No comment, but I would like to thank the staff for putting this together. Dr. Benavides and Ms. Breed, thank you for doing this.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Trustee Luedmanos. Trustee Paz, any comments?
Yes. And I promise that they will be long-winded, as I have allowed you to all grow to learn to expect. So I would like to just thank everyone for their interaction and their engagement tonight, and Mrs. Breed and Dr. Benavides for this great work. I've been getting text messages all night from people saying this is so powerful, and just how engaging this is for the people that are watching on YouTube or Facebook or wherever they're watching. And for Q, you know, I think that you really hit the nail on the head. You know, as one of your white colleagues that's been around this work for a while, you know, I have taken a lot of hits in my community, political hits, just from, you know, people saying that I'm divisive because I'm, you know, pushing this conversation, and that's fine. You know, none of that has stopped me from speaking up, and it's really hard. You know, it's difficult to have even close friends who, you know, will criticize you and say, well, you know, you're really pushing the envelope and you need to be focusing on student achievement. And that's the one that just really gets me, is that we cannot focus on student achievement without focusing on ending racial disparities in education. The two do not come separately. You cannot have one without the other. And Daphne, it looks like you're about to snap. Your screen froze. Oh, but you know, so yes, we have to, and you know, with me, you know, seeing the end of the tunnel is coming near for me. I've got 6 more school board meetings after this, assuming that the election to replace me will go to a runoff. And so, you know, with that in mind, I really hope that this is something that our board and the at least you know, new board, at least one new board member coming on, is that you know, this work will continue, and we you know, the board can continue to challenge the status quo, so to speak. And you know, we cannot make, like you said, we can't make an impact in, you know, with the police department or the fire department or juvenile, and with the county or with the city, but we can. I mean, these conversations, we're not just pushing these conversations in education and in urban education and in Texas education, but also in our local government. You know, we are setting a bar that other people are, who hold elected office and appointed office, are going to have to live up to. And, you know, the more courageous that this school board gets, the more expectations that the community will have for those of us around us, and, you know, our colleagues on the city council and county commissioners and other levels of our local government. So, you know, I really appreciate this, and I really appreciate those comments, Q, and also, I mean, and everyone's comment. I mean, I think I absolutely agree with Mr. Robbins that this is the missing link. But we've had this link around for a little while, and it's time, you know, we've got to start moving the needle forward. And like I said, the last thing I'll say, so I'm going to repeat it. You cannot have a focus on student achievement without focusing on the racial disparities, because the data doesn't lie.
Thank you, Trustee Paz, and thanks to each of you tonight. Trustee Phillips, you did, to quote Trustee Paz, hit the nail on the head. And I think you made me think a little too much and a little too big, but I'm going to throw this one out there. You said we couldn't impact everybody, but we can impact what we can control, is what I heard. Not your precise words, but that's what I heard. And what I believe is we have 19 districts within 903 square miles of Tarrant County. And I believe if all 19 districts join together, and I say this frequently with regard to COVID vaccines and everything else, 19 districts are powerful and 903 square miles are big. And I think that's where we go, and we go together. And on that, I want to thank Sherry Breed for everything she has done and all the work she has led. Dr. Benavides, thank you. What a wonderful addition and a compliment. You two are are somebody that looks like you've been working together for a decade. I don't know. How long has it been?
Just a few months. About 6 or 7 months.
I was going to say 10 months. Okay. So we'll say it's 6 or 7 years. Thanks to everybody tonight. Look forward to our next meeting. And Dr. Scribner, any comments?
No, just again, reiterating what the board has said. Thank you for your commitment to this work. They are intertwined. We've been making some great strides, prior to COVID, and we're going to recuperate those advancements that we had made and continue on an upward trajectory.
Okay. Any other comments? It's now, or we are for this evening forever adjourned.
Can I make one comment before I go? I just want to close us out with our beliefs drive our behaviors, and our behaviors drive our results. So I just want to end with that and have you think about that as we continue to grow our racial consciousness. And we look forward to continuing and finishing up conditions 5 and 6. Thank you guys so much for tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you all. Good night. Be safe.